Chapter 303. Genius in 1 second. Remember net, providing you with wonderful novels to read. In the palace hall of the Kingdom of Everwinter, the fire in the fireplace was already burning. Compared to Grey Castle, where the 4 seasons were distinct, the summer here was particularly short, and the autumn was more like a warning of the coming winter. Even before changing into light clothes, the cold wind would quietly come again. Garcia Wimbledon, wearing a fox fur coat, sat on the throne, listening to the complaints and demands of the nobles. She did not like this palace. The pillars, walls and floor were all made of snow-white stone, each piece polished smooth and translucent, looking like solid ice. Although 2 layers of velvet cushions were added to the seat, she could still feel the biting cold of the cold iron chair. The damned house looks like it's made of ice, she thought crossly. When the situation stabilized, the first thing to do was to smash all the walls, and then relay them with dark brown granite slabs. "Your Majesty, I hope you can seek justice for me," a noble said with a sad face. This guy had talked a lot before, but in fact, it could be clearly explained in a few words. It was nothing more than a public trial of some evil nobles after the church occupied the kingdom, presided over by Bishop Heather. Most of the nobles were hanged, but this guy was lucky. He was only sentenced to confiscation of his property and equally distributed to the victims. "I can understand your request. Private property cannot be plundered," Garcia pondered for a moment, then slowly said, "but the specific amount is difficult to define. How about this? If you can provide financial statements for the past 5 years, I can take a part of the seized property as compensation." "But, the mob looted my house. I'm afraid these records, then I can only according to the published notice, according to the standard of the title of nobility." Garcia interrupted, "Look around you, they are all nobles who have been looted. If I give you more, the others will get less. What do you think?" "That's right. Who knows if the number you reported is true or not? Why are you still so long-winded, Sir Halon? Those golden dragon don't belong to you. It's good enough that you have a share. Look at your accomplices. They can only go to the divine kingdom to ask for compensation." Seeing that the surrounding nobles were glaring at him, he had no choice but to bow and salute timidly. "Then we'll distribute them according to your standard." "Thank you for your kindness, Your Majesty." "Very good." Garcia smiled. "Next." "Greetings, Your Majesty." A white-haired old man walked out of the crowd and put his hand on his chest respectfully. The silver heron emblem on his chest was shining brightly. "Marquis Board, I remember that your territory was not attacked by the church's thugs." "Yes," he nodded. "It's not that they don't want to, but they can't. The snow ridge is easy to defend and hard to attack. My knight blocked the thugs' invasion. However, my son wasn't so lucky. On the day of the riot, he was on duty in the palace. In order to protect the former queen, not only was he killed by the believers, but his corpse was also hung on the city gate. It was only when you arrived at the Kingdom of Everwinter that he was freed from his humiliation." "What a tragic story." Garcia pretended to be sad and sighed. "So, what do you need me to do?" "The person who killed him is called the Butcher. Now, he has become the leader of the remaining rebels. They are hiding in the impassable mountain range in the north. I want to avenge my son," the Marquis calmly stated. "But I don't have many troops under me. Apart from patrolling, guarding the city wall and the granary, it's difficult for me to spare manpower to search for hundreds of exiled thugs in the wilderness." She shook her head and expressed her regret. "Once winter comes, the mountains will be blocked by snow. They won't get any supplies and will freeze to death sooner or later. Why are you in such a hurry?" "Only by killing the murderers can I find peace, Your Majesty. I don't need to trouble you to send warriors to search for the rebels. There are many natural caves at the foot of the mountain. They must be hiding there. However, most of the entrances to the caves are very narrow. If they are blocked with stones, even a knight would find it difficult to break in. I hope you can provide me with the kind of alchemy item that can blow up the city gate. I will do the rest myself." He wanted snow powder. Garcia frowned. Snow powder was very powerful, and it was a trump card that could change the situation of a battle. She could never let it spread out. She was just about to refuse when the Marquis continued, "If you can agree to my request, I am willing to return to the palace and serve you. The Silver Heron family will also fully support you in taking over the kingdom of Everwinter." This sentence made Garcia slightly stunned. When the church executed the queen, they also killed a group of important ministers. Marquis Baud was quite famous here. If he could become the prime minister and gather the rest of the nobles, to a certain extent, it could make up for the difficult administrative situation. This request is not too much, she thought for a moment and finally made a decision. "But I can't give you the alchemy powder directly. When you need it, I will send a special alchemist to help you blow up the cave." After the end of the court meeting, Garcia returned to the back room. Ryan came to greet her and handed her a cup of hot fruit wine. "You have worked hard, Your Majesty. Those nobles have really turned to you. In this way, even if you don't rely on the Wolf King, you can still slowly swallow the whole kingdom of Everwinter." "If there is no church," the queen shrugged. The church's action of depriving the nobles of their inheritance had pushed them all to her side. With the support of this group of people, coupled with the substantial weakening of the real power in the past, it would not be difficult for her to gain a foothold in King's City. However, there was still a long way to go before she wanted to control the kingdom of Everwinter. The people here were greatly influenced by the church. The Black Sail warriors she had sent to sweep the churches in several other big cities were attacked by civilians and believers. Therefore, forming an alliance with the kingdom of Wolfheart was extremely important. Not only could they resist the church together, but they could also weaken the influence of the church by sending people. As for those stubborn commoners, he would just kill them all. "That's right, the Wolf King just sent a messenger to deliver a letter to you." Ryan took out an envelope from his bosom. "Because you were dealing with government affairs at the time, I did not want to disturb you." Garcia opened the envelope, took out the letter and opened it. Her expression became dignified. "Is it bad news?" "The church has once again sent troops," she said in a low voice. "They are setting off by land towards the Wolfheart city, and have already broken through several temporary lines of defense." "What?" Ryan couldn't believe it. "The months of the demons is coming. Do they intend to ignore the new holy city?" Garcia sat back at her desk, frowning in thought. The church would never let this matter go, but she didn't expect that the other side would come so soon. If she had waited until next spring to start the war, she would have been much more prepared. The enemy clearly didn't want to give her a chance to breathe. If she just sat back and ignored the Wolf King's request for help, once the kingdom of Wolfheart was destroyed, she wouldn't be able to hold on for long. However, this was also an opportunity. If she could exhaust the church's army to death in the Wolfheart city, when the demonic beasts invaded Hermes, the enemy would face a disaster of destruction. Perhaps they would send more God's punishment army, but she also had a powerful weapon like snow powder, coupled with the difficult-to-extinguish Styx River black water, the demonic fire powder, as well as the towering walls of the Wolfheart city. She would certainly be able to consume a lot of the enemy's strength. Thinking until here, Garcia opened her mouth. "Pass my order, let the Black Sail warriors prepare for battle. This year we will spend the winter in the Wolfheart city." "Yes, your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 304. After nearly a week of assembly and testing, Roland and Anna together completed the development of the contact fuse for the bomb. Compared to the fuse for artillery shells, it did not need to withstand high temperature and pressure, nor did it have the high G overload when it left the chamber, so its structure was exceptionally simple. But even with such a thing made of a firing pin and a spring, the two of them still tested it many times before they succeeded. The main problem was that no one knew how much elasticity the spring needed in order to not misfire when it was accidentally dropped, and when it was thrown normally, they also had to ensure that the firing pin could steadily trigger the primer. He and Anna could only test it little by changing the thickness and hardness of the spring. Fortunately, the latter and Lucia had done a lot of work in advance, so Roland could use more and more high-quality materials. The last to pass the test was alloy 1365, which had high hardness and low toughness, so even if the bomb fell from a height of 1 meter, it would not be compressed to the bottom. After choosing a suitable spring, the rest came naturally. Even if Roland had never seen a real fuse, he could still design one based on its working principle. It was definitely backward, but for a stupid, black, and thick bomb, it was enough. The finished version of the contact fuse was like a cylinder, 12 centimeters long and about 5 centimeters in diameter, with a screw thread at the bottom, which could be screwed into the hole at the top of the bomb. Its interior was a convex groove, and the firing pin was similar, so it could be inserted into the groove. Under normal conditions, its upper part was pushed against the groove by the spring, and the firing pin fell into the groove, exactly 1 finger's distance from the primer. To be safe, Roland also made a hole in the head of the firing pin, and used a bolt to fix it on the cartridge case. Before throwing the bomb, the iron rod had to be pulled out first, so that the firing pin could move up and down. The simulation test was carried out on a sunny afternoon. Because this bomb, after being filled with gravel and black gunpowder, was already close to the weight of 5 Nightingale, Roland did not board the hot air balloon, but instead watched it from a telescope 300 meters away from the dropping site. In addition to him, the First Army's Commander Iron Axe and Chief Knight Carter Lannis were also watching the test. "Are you planning to use a hot air balloon to throw a giant bag of explosives into the palace?" After listening to Roland's battle plan, Carter could not believe his ears. Launching an attack from an altitude of 2,000 meters, ignoring the city wall and the garrison forces, this completely subverted his previous combat philosophy. Of course, during this year in Border Town, he had already been subverted many times. As long as it's properly controlled, it's not impossible to achieve, Roland nodded. Timothy is currently recruiting new militias. If we can't stop him, the Western Territory will inevitably be attacked by Yao army. Even if we win, it won't bring us the slightest benefit. The secret letter sent by Theo showed that Timothy still wanted to use the same old trick to consume his own strength. It was unknown whether the team of emissaries sent by Berev would be able to catch up with the other side and draw more people to Border Town. If you can really cast the wrath of heaven's thunder on Timothy's head, he will definitely be scared out of his wits, Iron Axe said excitedly. This is simply an irresistible heaven's punishment. I hope so, Roland smiled. Although Theo had mentioned in the letter that Timothy was likely to have already figured out the formula for the black gunpowder and opened a workshop in the inner city in an attempt to mass-produce this dangerous substance, but after thinking it over, he still chose the top of the palace as the target. The reason was very simple, because the palace was sufficiently eye-catching. Looking down from an altitude of 2,000 meters, even the most magnificent city of Greycastle was only the size of half a palm, so when throwing the bomb, it was necessary to find a good landing point in advance. The palace was in the center of the inner city, surrounded by a red-tiled wall, and the roof of the palace was paved with pure white slabs. During the fall, it looked particularly eye-catching, and it was almost impossible to mistake the target. But the workshop was different. He didn't have the layout of King's City, and there was no one on the ground to guide him, so it was difficult to clearly describe the target's location with words. In addition, the workshop itself was not large. Once the bomb fell into the residential area, the gains of this plan would not make up for the losses. Suddenly, a white shadow fell straight to the ground, causing a column of smoke to rise in the test field, followed by a dull thud. It seems that the bomb has fallen. Roland put away the telescope. Let's go and see the result. After a week of training, Lightning's bomb-throwing technique had made great progress. This bomb fell less than 5 meters away from the center of the target. The whole body of the bomb had sunk into the soil, and the outer shell had been greatly deformed under the impact. When Cloud Gazer landed, Anna used her black flame to cut open the bomb, and everyone saw that the soil near the fuse had already become a mass of charred black, which proved that the high temperature of the primer had ignited the black gunpowder scattered on the surface of the soil, and the fuse itself was working normally. If the inside of the bomb was filled with nitrostarch, it could easily create a 4 to 6 meter deep pit, and kill and injure the people within a range of 50 meters who had no shelter. Since the development of the bomb had been completed, the next step was to arrange the battle plan. Roland's gaze swept over everyone, and slowly said, "The surprise attack on King's City will be carried out next Monday. First of all, Iron Axe, you will lead a team of 50 people with flintlocks, and escort the witches to the outskirts of Silver City. There is a mountainous area there, which can block the view, so whether it is to set up a camp or to release a balloon, it will be very suitable." "As you bid, Your Highness," Iron Axe replied. "Are we not going to fly directly from Border Town?" Vendi asked. "No, that is too far," Roland shook his head. "From the western region to King's City it would take at least a week. If they were to use Cloud Gazer to fly directly, it would still take about 3 days, including the return journey, it would take 6 days. After the basket was installed with a throwing frame, it could only carry 2 people, so Nightingale couldn't go with them. Among the 4 witches, except for Anna, none of them had the ability to fight, so spending 6 nights in the wilderness was too risky. He really couldn't rest assured. If you set off from Silver City, you will only need 1 day to complete the bombing, and return before the sun sets. Next is the witches. This time the mission members are Anna, Vendi, Lightning, Maggie, Nightingale and Sylvie. The latter 2 are responsible for monitoring the situation around the camp. The attack process will be carried out by the first 4 according to the training methods, especially Lightning. He looked at the little girl. "Whether we can succeed or not depends on you." "Leave it to me," the latter said, patting her chest. "Then the last thing I want to say is, pay attention to your safety," Roland said word by word. "I will wait for your return in Border Town." Chapter 305. May did not expect that her heart would be full of expectations when she once again embarked on the return journey to Border Town. The woods along the Redwater River had begun to turn yellow, and the breeze blowing in her face brought a trace of coolness. The shimmering river water rolled under her feet, and from time to time, she could see fallen leaves sliding over the side of the boat. Without the anxiety and uneasiness from last time, the surrounding autumn scenery became poetic and picturesque. "Miss May," a reverent voice came from behind her, "your performance of the Witch's Diary, was it really written by His Royal Highness himself for you?" May turned around and saw a group of actresses gathering around her. The one in the lead was nervously looking at her. She remembered that her name seemed to be Swallow. "Aha, sorry," Irene waved at her from the bow of the boat and said loudly with a smile, "I can't answer their question, so I had to let them ask you." "This idiot." May secretly rolled her eyes. If it was before, she would have just sneered at them. Probably because she had been with Irene for a long time, her patience had unexpectedly grown. "It wasn't written by His Royal Highness for me, but by the Minister of Education of City Hall, Lady Scroll, for the witches." Is that so?" Swallow blinked her eyes. "When you argued with Bella, we all thought it was true. Written by His Royal Highness himself, and written by His Royal Highness himself for me, the difference between the 2 was like heaven and earth. In the end, how did these people hear the first half of the sentence as the second half? But the writing of the script and the performance of the play have been approved by His Royal Highness, so Bella laughing at the script is indeed equivalent to laughing at His Royal Highness himself. I didn't lie to her about this. Have you seen His Royal Highness? I heard that he has the signature long gray hair of the royal family, and that he is extraordinarily handsome. Is that true? I also heard that he has a romantic nature and has many lovers. Hey, it's true." Looking at this group of lively little girls, May could not help but frown. Damn it, I shouldn't have responded to their curiosity. "All right, don't bother Miss May." Rosia stepped forward and shooed them away, showing an apologetic look towards May. "It doesn't matter." She shrugged and continued to enjoy the scenery along the coast. "After all, I brought this trouble upon myself." "I don't understand," Rosia said, scratching her head. "Why did you take them with you when you left?" Out of 35 of them, only 2 of them have ever gone on stage, while the other 26 haven't even finished all of their drama classes. According to what you said before, they can't even be considered as fledglings. They are still in their eggshells and haven't hatched yet. Even if the Lord doesn't have high requirements for drama, I'm afraid it will still be difficult for His Royal Highness to accept them. If you want to take revenge on Bella, you should also rope in the experienced supporting actors. I don't plan on having all of them act. Ah. The other party was stunned. They can all understand the script, right? May smiled. Although they are still a long way from performing on stage, they can at least read and write. Haven't you noticed that His Royal Highness is currently in need of such talents? She paused for a moment. Do you think that His Royal Highness Roland Wimbledon really wants us to perform because of his love for drama? If it's Lord Perrault, then the answer must be yes. Before he took over Longsong Stronghold, he already had the habit of visiting the theater once a week. But for His Royal Highness Roland, except for the first performance of the new play, he won't appear in the town square. Therefore, his promotion of drama is not because of his own preferences, but because he intends to use drama to promote his views to the public. May continued, compared to the initial emphasis on resistance to oppression and that witches are not evil, the new script, Dawn, and the new city have moved closer to the goal of recruiting people and making a fortune through hard work. I'm just following his wishes and doing my best. So that's how it is. I never thought about this, Rosia said, speechless. Pondering over a script, in addition to thinking about the role, you also have to try your best to understand the meaning of the whole story. This is also the quality that an excellent actor must have. Yes, thank you for your guidance, she bowed and said. Don't worry, May raised the corner of her mouth. If you don't want to act, you can also find a good job in border town. Maybe you can even enter the city hall and become an administrative officer. After all, His Royal Highness doesn't care about identity, nor does he care about family background. This road is much easier than being an actor. After the ship arrived in border town, May saw Philin Eltek standing at the dock to welcome them. Of course, he came for Irene. Seeing the girl rushing into his arms, she sighed softly. Isn't that man the light of dawn? So he wasn't sentenced to exile by His Royal Highness. The first knight of the Western region, that's great, Swallow said enviously. I thought he would be with the star of the theater. What nonsense are you talking about? May's cold voice made everyone immediately shut up. Quickly take your luggage and get off the ship. Gate and Rosia will take you to the city hall to register your identity. As for the rest, just listen to their arrangements. Yes, everyone replied respectfully. Walking down the dock, Philin came over with his wife and greeted her with a hand on his chest. Miss May, Irene just told me about the conflict in the theater. Thank you for taking care of her. You don't have to thank me, May said disapprovingly. They seem to be looking for trouble with her, but in fact, they came for me. Even so, I still want to thank you, the knight laughed heartily. If it weren't for you, she would have cried on the spot. After the two left, May curled her lips, carried her luggage alone, and walked to the residential area. Although she had let go of this feeling, seeing this scene still made her feel a little emotional. Moreover, the familiar figure did not appear, but in the letter he vowed to give her a surprise. Well, after all, he is an important person around His Royal Highness, and it is impossible for him to act as he pleased like the light of dawn. Back home, May put down her luggage, and a long-lost sense of relaxation came over her. She took a long breath, took out the white wine from the cupboard, and was about to drink a cup, when someone knocked on the door. Opening the door, she saw Carter Lannis standing outside. I didn't expect you to arrive half an hour early, he wiped the sweat from his forehead. I heard that the ship from Longsong Stronghold had arrived, so I rushed over from the barracks. She did not know why, although she did not see him at the dock, and obviously did not receive her. Seeing his appearance made May's mood instantly happy. Do you want to have a drink? No, I have a task in the afternoon. Carter waved his hand. Well, she nodded. His Royal Highness's task is more important. I came to give you a gift. The chief knight took out a small white wooden box from his pocket and handed it to her. Is this the latest product from the convenience market? May curiously took the wooden box, opened the lid, and saw a yellow ring quietly standing at the bottom of the box. The top of the ring was inlaid with a bright transparent gem, reflecting the autumn sunlight through the window with a colorful light. There was no doubt that this ring was very expensive, and was unlikely to be sold in the convenience market. Moreover, a noble giving a ring meant that she could not help but cover her mouth. Chapter 306. It had been 4 days since the witches and the first army set out. According to the plan, they should arrive at the outskirts of Silver City tomorrow afternoon. After being equipped with Honey's flying messenger, Roland received letters from the team every day, from Iron Axe, Anna, and Nightingale. Although it wasn't as fast as a mobile phone, it was basically similar to a wireless telegraph. If there were several times more flying messengers on this route, and there were birds flying back and forth between the two places at all times, they might be able to simulate the effect of a text message chat. In the absence of Nightingale, the chief knight took over the important task of guarding the castle. But what puzzled Roland was that these days, Carter always had a cheerful appearance, as if he had encountered something particularly happy. Was it really so happy to be back to his job and be responsible for the personal guard? He shook his head and focused his attention on the report of the Minister of Construction, Car Van Bate. With the help of the Sleeping Island witches, the construction project in Border Town had progressed at a rapid pace in the past month. First of all, the steel bridge over the Redwater River was successfully completed. Compared to the traditional stone bridge and wooden bridge, the steel bridge body could be made in advance, and then hoisted as a whole. In addition, Lotus had raised 2 floating islands in the river, which further simplified the difficulty of its construction, so that the main bridge construction period was shortened to an astonishing 1 month. Although in the eyes of future generations, it was short and narrow, the structure was too simple, the load was extremely low, and it was a pure waste of materials, but in this era, it could already be regarded as a magnificent super bridge, with a total length of more than 100 meters, and the bridge deck was flat enough for 2 carriages to pass side by side, and the lower part could also accommodate the passage of inland river sailboats, no matter which point it was not possible for the heavy stone bridge to achieve. Secondly, Lotus's new city wall had also been completed. This wall made of pure mud had increased the area of the town by more than 2 times. If the city was to be built in the future, the original town would become a veritable, inner city. However, Roland was more inclined to the idea of 1 or 2 rings. Perhaps one day in the future, this place could also be expanded into a giant city with 7 rings, officially crowned as the imperial capital. Finally, there was the construction of the Kingdom Main Road. Some of the mountain feet that extended down the impassable mountain range were leveled by the Lotus, allowing the road to go straight through, greatly reducing the total construction period. Your Highness, what's the next step of the construction plan that you've arranged for Lotus? Each jar was about the height of 2 people, and the top was connected to a pipe. The neat and smooth shape was obviously cut by Anna. Salute to you, Your Royal Highness, a seemingly very young man bowed to Roland. You are Chavez, right? Although he had already known that Kyle had dug out a group of alchemy apprentices from Redwater City, and had even roped in an outstanding alchemist, today was the first time he had seen his appearance. You unexpectedly remember my name, Chavez said in surprise. Mr. Kyle has mentioned you many times. Roland patted his shoulder to show encouragement. Do a good job. Then he looked at the chief alchemist. How does this thing produce acid? Kyle stroked his beard and laughed. It can be successfully developed, completely according to the derivation of the reaction formula of elementary chemistry. You see that furnace? The purified sulfur will be burned in the furnace, the resulting gas will be further heated, and then sent into the lead jar. These devices are all made of lead. Yes, only lead can resist the corrosion of acid. Kyle nodded. The lead pipe at the top of the jar is constantly sprinkled with nitric acid. Under the hot sulfur dioxide gas, the nitric acid is heated and decomposed into nitrogen oxide, and finally mixed with water and sulfur dioxide to form a sulfuric acid solution, which flows out of the hole at the bottom. The ingenuity of this reaction lies in the fact that the nitrogen oxide only plays the role of transferring oxygen, and does not consume itself, so the amount of nitric acid used is not large. Once the reaction starts, it can be continuously carried out. What is its output? Roland excitedly asked while patting the lead jar. Large-scale production of acid was the prerequisite for the mass production of smokeless gunpowder. If this problem could be solved, there would be hope for a new generation of ammunition for flintlocks and cannons. This is the 4th device I have tried to make, and its output in 1 day is probably equal to that of the laboratory's dry distillation method in a week. The chief alchemist proudly said, because of the experimental factors, its volume is not large. If we can build a larger capacity of lead jar, the output can be further increased. This is really good news, Roland said with a smile. When Miss Anna returns, you can immediately start building a larger-scale acid device. In addition, if the lead is not enough, you can use iron instead. Miss Soroya's coating can make the iron free from acid corrosion. Kyle nodded, but his next words made the prince's smile freeze on his face. Chapter 307. Scroll stood behind His Highness Roland, quietly watching him write the manuscript. The autumn sun shone through the window behind her, making her feel as if her whole body was bathed in warmth. Ah, in addition to electronic gains and losses, what else is there? I'm waiting online, it's urgent. From time to time, the prince would write on the paper, and then he would hold his forehead in contemplation, and would also say some incomprehensible nonsense. At first, Scroll was still somewhat worried about his physical condition, but later she found out that this was just His Highness's normal state when he was recalling knowledge. But today's symptoms were more serious than ever. Unfortunately, she couldn't help him. Scroll sighed. Among the witches, perhaps only Anna could help him in this aspect. She had already memorized the contents of the previous few pages written by His Highness, but it was just memorization, nothing more. This knowledge was much more profound than the mathematics and natural principles of the past. Just reading it once was enough to make people dizzy. It was no wonder that His Highness would be so embarrassed. How about, we stop here for today, Scroll couldn't help but say. Roland gave up and put down the pen, leaned back on the chair and took a deep breath. I really envy your photographic memory. If I could be like you, why would I be afraid of exams? I would have long been admitted to a famous school and reached the peak of life. She automatically ignored the latter half of the other side's nonsense. Does His Highness also need to take an exam in the palace? Yes, otherwise how can we distinguish which prince is better, he muttered. In fact, sometimes it's not good to remember everything, Scroll said with a smile. For example, bad experiences, sad things, it's better to forget them. When she was in Sewanshire, because of her poor identity, she had suffered countless insults and beatings. Until now, she still clearly remembered the place where she was hit, the perpetrator's twisted face to vent his anger, and the pain caused by every punch and kick. It wasn't until she was sheltered by the old captain with a broken leg that her life became slightly better. In fact, in a place like the slums, there were people who died every day because of internal robberies and fights, and it was no less than those who died of cold or hunger. For a long time, she had been extremely disgusted with herself, while all the suffering was still vivid in her mind. Because the scene in the memory was too clear, every nightmare in the middle of the night was almost repeating the unbearable past. Later, on the day of her adulthood, she awakened the branch ability, Book of Magic. Only then did she realize that her extraordinary memory came from her identity as a witch. Roland probably guessed what she was thinking and smiled apologetically. You're right. Scroll immediately felt a warm current flowing through her heart. Very few people would care about a witch's opinion, not to mention that she was a prominent member of the royal family. It doesn't matter. It's all in the past, Your Highness. Roland Wimbledon was different from the nobles she had met. In fact, he was completely different from the people she had met. He had vast knowledge, but he always wanted to pass it on to others. He had a noble status, but he didn't reject others. He enjoyed the adoration of others, so he could do whatever he wanted. However, not only did he not do so, but he also took care of others' feelings. In just 1 year, a desolate and impoverished town had undergone earth-shaking changes. The witches had also obtained the peace and freedom they had longed for a long time, all thanks to His Royal Highness Roland. If she hadn't experienced it herself, she wouldn't have believed that there was such a ruler in the world. Now, Scroll found that her own thoughts were changing little by little. Before, she didn't agree with His Royal Highness marrying a witch, but now she felt that no matter who His Royal Highness married, he would ascend to the throne of Greycastle. He didn't rely on those conventional and greedy nobles, but on the people who supported him to bring a better life. She vaguely felt that this force would be stronger than any previous force. Ah, forget it, Roland suddenly rubbed his head. This is the last page of content. Should I record it tomorrow? No, just give it to him like this. Also, include a physics textbook, it should be enough for him to study for a while. His Royal Highness took out a new piece of paper and quickly wrote a few big words. After all, it's a book from the ancient times, it's normal to be missing more than half of it, right? Scroll took the paper and saw the name of the book written on it, Intermediate Chemistry. After finishing the memorization work, she left the office and was ready to go to the city hall. The beautiful scenery of the backyard attracted her attention. With the completion of the castle wall expansion, the backyard was now almost the size of a small town square. In less than a week, it was full of all kinds of plants. There was no doubt that this must be the masterpiece of Leaf. Scroll followed the olive tree path and walked step by step into the depths of the garden. After passing through a row of dense sugarcane fields, she saw Leaf sitting next to a small pond, resting. She did not wear her usual braids. Instead, her long green hair was casually draped over her shoulders. Her pure white feet gently splashed the water, and she was holding pieces of wheat in her hands. From time to time, she would throw them to the schools of fish that were swimming around. Every time a fish came up to rub against her toes, Leaf couldn't help but chuckle. "Your foot is better." Scroll sat down beside her. "Ah, Teacher Scroll," she blinked, then nodded and smiled. "Yes, Miss Nana restored it to its original state, so that I don't have to endure the pain of my toes in winter." "Are the plants in the garden all improved by you?" "Yes," Leaf pointed happily. "Over there are the grape sheds, and over here are the fruit trees and crops. I also asked His Highness to send a batch of compost, just in time to test the absorption effect of the new crops. In addition, there are dozens of bird nests in the fruit tree area, and all the flying messengers raised by honey are sleeping on the trees." Scroll lovingly stroked her long hair. "I thought you would be the first witch in the Witch Cooperation Association to evolve. After all, when you were in the impassable mountain range, your ability was no less than Kara's. His Highness said that evolution comes from the understanding of one's own ability. Plant cells are indeed incredible, but I have long felt that they should be a whole. You see, when a bundle of grass is condensed into a ball, it can change into a flexible vine. If they are different, how can they fuse together?" Scroll opened her mouth, not knowing whether to comfort her or to agree with her words. Finally, she said, "Even if your ability doesn't evolve, you can still do a lot of things for His Highness." Chapter 308. Reeks, the hot air balloon was flying at an altitude of more than 2,000 meters. This was the distance lightning measured by flying vertically. As long as she raised her head, she could see the clouds close at hand, like a ball of loose cotton. However, if she wanted to really touch it, she would have to fly several hundred meters higher. The whole hot air balloon was painted with alternating blue and white patches, and from a distance, it looked exactly the same as the sky. She had also put on camouflage clothes, and even the East Wind No. 1 was the same. According to His Highness's request, this surprise attack must be sudden and covert, so the First Army had not yet arrived at Silver City's pier when they disembarked, and walked to the back of the nearby mountain. Under the supervision of Sylvie, the team's route avoided all eyes, and from beginning to end did not attract anyone's attention. After the camp was set up, the Cloud Gazer slowly lifted off the next day, and began to carry out the dropping mission. Counting the time spent on the road for a week, today was the beginning of the autumn. The white shadow flying in front of the hot air balloon was Maggie. Because it was inconvenient to observe from the basket, she took on the task of guiding and scouting. After transforming into a white-tailed goshawk, even if she was high up in the sky, she could still quickly distinguish the road connecting the town and the carriages running on the road. In this regard, the eagle's eye was much more useful than the telescope. Fortunately, the other side can't correct the landing point of the bomb, Lightning thought, otherwise I really would have nothing to do. Are you tired? Anna asked while lying on the side of the basket. Come in and rest, there won't be any demons here anyway. The little girl shook her head. At this speed, I can fly for a whole day. Are you a little nervous? Vendi also came over. Not at all, she curled her lips. I have practiced many times, and besides, the palace is so big, it's impossible to miss. Is that so? Vendi smiled. In any case, don't try to be brave, His Highness said that safety is the first priority. Moreover, what happened when we went to investigate the Devil's Town was not your fault. What, the other party said in a gentle tone, anyone can see that you've been depressed these days. However, it's not that you're afraid of fighting, it's just that you're not good at it. If it were me, I might not be able to do better than you. Indeed, Nightingale has the reflexes and skills that most witches don't have. Anna also comforted him. You should come in and rest for a while, it will take a lot of magic power to adjust the falling point of the bomb. Seeing that both of them said so, Lightning answered softly through her nose and flew into the basket with her head down. Before he landed, he was pulled into Vendi's arms. UU3, the wind whistled in her ears, and the scene on the ground continued to expand. Little by little, the details of the inner city palace appeared in front of Lightning's eyes. Compared to the low houses that the civilians lived in, the scale of the palace building was much larger. Its main body was composed of a dome, a banquet hall, and a high tower castle. The rest of the auxiliary buildings such as stables, barracks, warehouses, and so on were all available. Taking into account the castle's steep walls and complex roof structure, it wasn't easy to trigger the fuse, so His Royal Highness finally chose the palace hall as the target. With a sharp decline in altitude, the parachute quickly reached the point of release. Lightning pulled the mechanism, allowing the parachute to detach from the body of the bomb, and at the same time, quickly climbed up with it in her arms. Before leaving, His Royal Highness had repeatedly told her that she must rise to a high enough safe position before the bomb hit the ground, and that she must not look back at the explosion. But the little girl still couldn't restrain her curiosity, and couldn't help but lower her head. She saw a dazzling flash of light at the top of the palace hall, and then it rapidly expanded. The incandescent light quickly turned into a bright orange-red, and then disappeared into the rolling smoke. This process lasted less than a breath, and then a deafening explosion suddenly exploded in her ears, almost making her lose her balance. It wasn't that Lightning hadn't seen the roar of gunfire on the battlefield, but compared to those terrible weapons that shot iron balls, the sound of Dongfeng No. 1 was 10 times louder than all of them combined. Smoke violently spewed out from the pillars and windows of the palace hall, engulfing the outer courtyard and corridors. Soon, the dome, with the bomb as the center, showed several cracks. Lightning couldn't help but stop, holding her breath as she stared at the last moment of the palace hall. These black lines were like wanton flowing ink, and in an instant, they covered the entire roof, and then the roof was no longer able to support itself, and collapsed with a loud bang, raising an even stronger smoke. Under the amazing power of Dongfeng No. 1, the palace hall collapsed. To be continued. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 309. Theo had been in contact with His Royal Highness once a day for the past few days. Although he had seen many incredible things during his year as His Highness' personal guard, the new order still made him feel inconceivable and confused. The attack on the palace in King's City was portrayed as Roland Wimbledon's punishment for Timothy Wimbledon. When the militia that had attacked the Western Territory had been defeated and returned to King's City, it wasn't as if he hadn't heard about the warning that they had carried with them. Theo had thought that this was just a bluff by His Highness, or perhaps a strategy to create a diversion, taking advantage of Timothy's vigilance and defense to send troops to attack other cities, just like what Garcia had done, to loot their opponents before the coming of winter. However, the subsequent orders from Border Town made him feel that something was wrong. It seemed that His Highness really intended to attack King's City, and had asked him to prepare for propaganda. The latest order clearly stated that the attack would be launched on the first day of mid-autumn, which was exactly the same time as the warning. Look at this sentence, exaggerate the attack on King's City Palace as punishment. In other words, His Highness will directly attack the inner city of King's City, but how is that possible? King's City had the strongest walls of Greycastle, which were thick enough to accommodate 2 houses side by side. Even His Highness' cannons would find it difficult to destroy them. With the addition of the King's City Knight Regiment, his personal guards, and the conscripted militia, it would be difficult to break into the city without an army of more than 10,000 people. Using witches to launch a surprise attack was also a fantasy. The god's stone of retaliation in the palace was as numerous as the hairs on an ox. Moreover, in the main hall, bedroom and other places, there were giant god's stone of retaliation. As long as a witch stepped into a room, all of her abilities would be taken away. This was also the reason why no one retaliated when Timothy hunted and killed witches. It was simply impossible to assassinate a member of the royal family in the palace. Moreover, there was a hidden danger in this method. If Timothy Wimbledon really died in the hands of a witch, the church would benefit the most. As long as the church was guided a little, the fourth prince's futile attempt to unite with the devil's minions to seize the throne would become a reality. At the same time, the nobles would unite to resist his power. However, with His Highness Roland's wisdom, Theo believed that he would definitely be able to see this point. Then how is His Highness going to break into the inner city? Sir, what orders do you have for me? Hillfox pushed open the half-closed door and walked into the living room. Waiting for a new order, Theo said, spreading out his hands. You can sit down first. Yes. Seeing the astonished expression on the former acrobatic troupe member's face, Roland could only smile helplessly. Usually, he would only inform these people when he received specific orders, but this time, it was not convenient for him to inform them of the task given by Her Highness in advance. If the palace in King's City had not been attacked, this seemingly absurd order could easily reduce the trust of the other party. But on the contrary, if His Highness really did it, it would be an unprecedented shock to them, and it would also greatly boost the confidence of this group of people, especially when they witnessed with their own eyes that His Highness was able to pose a real threat to Timothy's throne from thousands of miles away. Such a propaganda effect would be more effective than him wasting his breath. So Theo chose a compromise, first calling Hill to the inner city, and then waiting for His Highness to realize his warning. If he succeeded, everyone would naturally be happy, but if he failed, he only needed to lie and say that the messenger might have been delayed on the road. Drink some tea, Theo said with a smile. Don't always wear doubts on your face. As an intelligence officer, the most important thing is, hide yourself, sir. He took the teacup. That's right, recently there have been a lot of patrols on the streets, and even the number of guards on the city wall has doubled. Could it be that these transfers are related to His Highness's orders? That's right, Timothy. Theo had just finished speaking when a sudden clap of thunder suddenly rolled over the top of the mansion. The sound was so loud that even the window glass trembled. At the same time, the ground slightly shook, and the tremor was brief but clear. Hill was caught off guard, and the teacup in his hand fell straight to the ground, breaking into several pieces. I'm sorry, sir, but... Hill was dumbfounded. What's going on? Come with me, Theo said with a serious look. The two of them rushed out of the garden residence, and were immediately attracted by a column of black smoke in the direction of the palace. Obviously, the sound of thunder had come from there. He had seen His Highness's cannons and flintlocks, so he naturally knew that only alchemy powder could produce a sound like the wrath of heaven. Moreover, such a violent tremor didn't seem to be caused by the bombardment, but more like the bag used to deal with the thick-armored demonic beasts. Hill's mouth opened wide, and he could hardly believe his eyes. Could it be that His Highness's declaration in the warning was true? Yes, Theo finally felt relieved. He turned around and pretended to be profound. This is also the new order that His Highness wants to give you. Timothy's face was livid, and he looked at the falling chandelier in front of him, unable to speak for a long time. Your Majesty, cough cough. Your Majesty, are you all right? The Prime Minister coughed amidst the flying dust. Damn it, what the hell happened outside? Timothy didn't answer, he only felt that his throat was very dry. Under the chandelier was a silver-armored knight, who had been reporting to him about the recruitment of refugees, but now his neck had been broken by the falling chandelier. If he had taken another step forward, I'm afraid he would also. At the thought of this, he felt his hair stand on end. Is this an earthquake? The Minister of Finance was still in shock. We have to quickly leave the castle and go to an open place. That's right, Your Majesty, it's not safe here. All of you, shut up! Timothy shouted. Only when he opened his mouth did he realize that his voice was very hoarse, as if someone had squeezed his throat to speak. Sir Weimer, immediately take me to the basement. Yes, Your Majesty. Although the Knight Steelheart also looked a little nervous, compared to the other ministers, he was very calm. He came over to help Timothy up and walked downstairs. Along the way, the new king saw that the corridor was full of broken glass, and through the broken window, he saw that the Hall of Heaven on one side of the castle no longer existed. Amidst the rising smoke and dust, this magnificent building now only had a few lonely stone pillars left. This was not caused by an earthquake, but by a large amount of snow powder explosion. Leaving the castle now was undoubtedly suicide. Only God knew whether Roland Wimbledon had buried snow powder in other places. Only the basement with thick stone walls was safe enough. Damn it, Timothy thought bitterly, why does my fourth brother also have this kind of alchemy weapon? Could it be that when Garcia had left the port of Clearwater, she had also given him the recipe, so that he could use the snow powder to fight with her? But even if that was the case, how did he bury the snow powder in the palace? Even a witch with extraordinary abilities would not be able to do this. Take the Knight Regiment and thoroughly search the entire palace area, especially the sewers, gardens and warehouses, where snow powder can easily be hidden. As soon as he stepped into the basement, Timothy immediately ordered the Knight Steelheart, if you find any suspicious people, whether they are nobles or not, arrest them first. All attendants and servants entering and leaving the palace must be thoroughly searched, no one can escape. Yes, Your Majesty. After Sir Weimer left, the new king found that his back was wet with cold sweat. Roland actually did this. Regardless of how he did it, this time he was able to hide snow powder in the palace. Next time, wouldn't it be as easy as turning over his hand to hide it in the castle? Your position is far from as safe as you think. When the time comes, everyone will see that your throne is already on the verge of collapse. Thinking of this warning, Timothy could not help but shiver. When his anger gradually subsided, he felt fear rising from the soles of his feet, bit by bit gripping his heart. Chapter 310. On the second day of mid-autumn, Roland received a secret letter from King's City. 9 out of 10 letters were sent by his personal guard, Theo, through a flying courier. Unfolding the note wrapped around the bird's claw, Roland walked to the window and carefully read it under the bright sunshine. Your Highness, your plan has achieved an amazing success. Because the palace was quickly sealed and no one was allowed to enter or leave, I was unable to find out the effect of the explosion. However, by the evening, almost all the residents knew about the attack on the palace. Whether it was in pubs, inns, or squares, wherever people gathered, there was only one topic of discussion. Even the death of the late king did not have such a sensational impact. In addition to the warning you issued before, many people now even think that Timothy has been killed in this attack, and that you will soon come to King's City and become the new ruler of Grey Castle. This content made Roland completely relieved. The bombing mission had been successfully completed, and the witches had safely returned. There was no better news than this. After making himself a cup of tea, he returned to the mahogany table and continued to read. However, according to the information collected so far, there has been no movement in the territories of the great nobles outside King's City, and the reaction of the palace was also very fast. Therefore, I speculate that Timothy Wimbledon is likely still alive. In addition, there are people who swear that the attack came from the sky. Some residents saw a pale white object falling from the sky and falling into the palace at a very fast speed. Therefore, I already have a preliminary plan for the task you gave me. If we can exaggerate this matter as a punishment from heaven for the atrocities of the fake king, I think many people will believe it. The people I recruited are full of enthusiasm. Usually, they have collected a lot of information about Timothy's tyrannical behavior. Now that they are mixed together, I think it will be more effective. I believe that in less than a month, this news will spread to the ears of every citizen through the Black Street rats. In addition, I will continue to closely monitor the movements of the eastern suburbs barracks. However, according to the current situation, Timothy should have no time to care about other things before he can come up with a countermeasure to resist the attack. There was no signature at the end of the letter. After reading it, Roland folded the letter and put it in a drawer, then he let out a long sigh. It would be great if Easterly Wind No. 1 could really prevent Timothy from dispatching troops. After all, it was too much of a waste to waste a large number of people on potions in battle. The later the enemy started a war of attrition, the more opportunities he would have to win over people. Roland picked up the cup and took a sip of the fragrant black tea. What he needed to do next was to wait for the witches to return. He hadn't seen Anna for a few days, and no one had stolen the dried fish from his drawer. He felt a little uncomfortable. Just then, Carter pushed open the office door. "Your Highness, 2 fleets have arrived at the pier." "Has the Marjorie Chamber of Commerce arrived?" Considering the time spent on the road, she missed a good show. "Wait." Roland was slightly stunned. "There's another fleet?" "Yes," Carter said with a smile, "the emissary delegation you sent to the Southern Territory to recruit people has returned. The refugees they brought with them have almost filled up the docks. City Hall is following your plan and carrying out that quarantine work." Yes, it's to eliminate the possible existence of demonic plague." The chief knight coughed twice. "This batch has about 400 or 500 people." "Is that so?" Roland couldn't help but raise the corner of his mouth. He had just been talking about this matter, and now it was effective. It seemed that the temporary housing that Lotus was responsible for would have to be increased. "Let's go and see." Kyle Sichi put down the thin remnant of the book and kept repeating the same sentence, "So that's how it is." "Mentor?" Chavez asked with some concern. Since he had received this intermediate chemistry, Kyle hadn't slept for 2 days. He almost spent the whole night reading the entire ancient book. He had also glanced at it a few times, but the content was too profound and difficult to understand. "I'm fine," the chief alchemist's voice didn't sound tired at all. Instead, he was full of energy. Although the corners of his eyes had dirt, his eyes were bright and full of expression. He didn't look like someone who had stayed up all night. When a mentor was studying alchemy, he couldn't easily disturb him. This was a rule that a disciple should abide by. Until now, Chavez dared to open his mouth and ask, "This book? I don't understand. What is an atom, and what is an electron?" "You are already a qualified alchemist, so you don't need to call yourself a disciple. According to His Highness, we are now colleagues." Kyle paused. "As for your question, I don't know how to answer it. In fact, when His Highness Roland gave me the intermediate chemistry, he also included this book." Chavez looked at the other book on the table. On the cover was written the words, "Theoretical Basis of Natural Science." Sichi. Sir, he was not used to this title. "It seems to have nothing to do with alchemy, no, chemistry." "I originally thought so," Kyle said while stroking his beard. "But after flipping through a few pages, I realized that I actually know nothing about this world." "What?" Chavez stared blankly. "No, nothing. Alchemists study the composition of objects and the nature of elements. If even they know nothing about it, then what difference is there between other people and monkeys?" "I mean the concept." The voice of the chief alchemist was full of excitement and satisfaction. "We think that alchemy is alchemy, that it is the study of material knowledge. The rising and setting of the sun, the blooming and withering of flowers, none of this has anything to do with us. Isn't that the case?" the observation of the sun and the stars is what astrologers are good at. As for plants, Chavez said with slight disdain, only farmers and herb gatherers would study them. That's why we know nothing, Kyle said while shaking his head. From the very beginning, this book tries to link all things together. Whether it's stones, flowers, thunder, or flames, they are all made up of unified things and operate under unified rules. Not only does chemistry react according to the rules, even the rising and falling of the sun, the blooming and withering of flowers are the same. This rule is so precise that as long as the starting conditions are the same, the results will be exactly the same. Chemistry is only a small part of it. How is this possible? I also think it's hard to imagine. He spread out the periodic table of elements. In intermediate chemistry, it defines the shape of the elements as a big ball surrounded by many small balls. The big ball determines what kind of element it is, and the number of layers and numbers of the small balls determine the characteristics of the element. And this list is arranged according to this rule. They are as neat as a line of soldiers. I also completely understand His Highness's meaning, why we have never seen or come into contact with this element, but we can also infer its nature and reaction mechanism. Because even the fundamental reaction is also the gain and loss of the small balls, it simply doesn't involve the change of the big ball. This is also the reason why the elements in the reaction won't disappear, only transfer. Chavez pondered for a moment. Do you believe it? These theories are too vague, and can't be verified with the naked eye, so, how did the people who wrote the books know about them? I don't know. So I can't answer your previous question, Kyle smiled, but it's not important whether I believe it or not. The key is that it provides a perspective that I have never imagined. It allows me to see another door, and the door is not only engraved with chemistry. Speaking until here, his tone slightly paused. Unfortunately, His Highness wasn't able to record it all. He may not be able to understand what he missed. Chavez didn't understand what Kyle had said. Just like when he first became an apprentice, the alchemist's terminology was like another language to him. Now, he once again had this feeling. But he wasn't worried. As long as he stayed by his mentor's side, he would certainly be able to learn these so-called inner connections of all things. Compared to the chief alchemist, the one thing he didn't lack the most was time. After a moment of silence, Chavez opened his mouth to ask, but, why did His Highness distribute these books, with different colors of names? The chief alchemist let out an, sound. I actually overlooked it. Could it be a random act? But he quickly shook his head. No, if it was black and red it would be fine, but these colors are particularly difficult to match, so it's unlikely that it was unintentional. In other words, His Highness deliberately made it like this? Elementary chemistry was blue, natural science theoretical foundation was blue, elementary mathematics was green, and intermediate chemistry, remnant volume, was written in purple paint. Looking at them individually, they didn't stand out, but if they were placed together, they would be particularly eye-catching. Probably in order to look good? Chavez guessed. To be continued. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 311. Maine stood on an arched hillside, looking at the city in front of him. The last time he came, Wolfshart City was far from what it looked like now. Its walls were built with snow stones from the kingdom of eternal winter, clean and white, just like the teeth of a newborn wolf. In just 3 months, it had completely changed its appearance. The damaged parts were filled with local black boulders, and the parts that couldn't be repaired in time were built with wooden frames and baffles. The flowing blood soaked into the cracks of the stone, staining it with a touch of reddish-brown. From a distance, the current walls were rough and covered with dirt, like the teeth of a weather-beaten old wolf. Compared to before, it was more like the fangs of a predator, only after biting its prey would it become more frightening. The church's army set up camp about 5 miles away from Wolfshart City. In order to prevent the Queen of Clearwater from attacking the old holy city, the scale of the army this time was not as large as the last time. The army of judges and the supply team each had 5,000 people, while the God's punishment army had about 800 people. But with top-secret siege weapons and the pure witches, Maine had full confidence in capturing the Wolf King's lair. "Your Eminence, the siege beasts have been placed in place, ready to attack at any time." A priest ran to the top of the hill and reported to him. "What about the pure witches who control them?" "They're also ready." Maine raised the telescope and observed the position of the siege beasts, only to see two huge steel beasts lying in the field 2 miles away from King's City, surrounded by baffles on both sides and a straw shed on top. If one didn't look closely, it would be difficult to notice the strange shape of this weapon. Moving his line of sight forward, he saw the God's punishment army. They were all transformed from the most devout believers of the church, standing straight and motionless in the autumn wind. Only enemies who had fought with them would know the terrifying power possessed by these extraordinary warriors. Unfortunately, they couldn't act on their own and had to fight under the orders of their commanders. These commanders never appeared in public in front of the church, and when they fought, they disguised themselves as members of the God's punishment army, mixing with the troops. Except for the 3 archbishops and the Pope, no one knew their true identity. "Very good," Maine nodded with satisfaction. "Return to your position and wait for the horn to sound." "Yes, Your Eminence." Next was the Supreme Pontiff's pure witch. When he thought of those 2 witches, he couldn't help but frown. They were completely different from the other witches who had been raised by the church. Even when they were marching and fighting, they still acted in their own way. If it had been one of Maine's pure witches, they would definitely have been whipped as punishment. However, in terms of position in the church, they were on equal footing with the bishop, so Maine had no way to order them around. His Holiness the Pope had only sent 2 pure witches to assist him in battle, but not to order them to fight under his orders. However, he also understood that it was necessary to borrow their strength if he wanted to completely eradicate the hidden danger. The bishop walked down the hill and came to a tent on the outskirts of the camp. He lifted the curtain, and as expected, the tent was empty. "Where are Zero and Isabella?" he asked the judgment army guarding the door. "Your Excellencies are interrogating the prisoner," replied the latter, "and they must be on the east side of the camp, where there is a level open space, which you can see on the way." "Would you like me to call them over?" "If you could summon them, I wouldn't have come here myself." Moreover, it was a captive game. Weren't they tired of it yet? Maine said with a sullen face, "No need, I'll go and have a look." He soon found the place the guard had mentioned. He saw 2 women standing in the middle of the open space. One of them was leaning forward and whispering something into the ears of the other 3 captives, whose hands were tied behind their backs. Her expression was gentle and focused, and her long white hair and robe danced in the wind, like a flawless elf. The other woman had an impressive figure and golden curly hair, and from time to time, she let out a clear and melodious laugh. "Tell the surrounding judgment army to leave this place immediately," Maine ordered the presiding judge, who was acting as a guard beside him. "The same goes for the people in charge of the captives. Tell them not to interfere in this matter." "Yes." The blonde witch had also noticed the commotion here. She greeted her companions and then quickly walked over. "Your Excellency," the person who came bowed slightly and said, "Why did you drive away the spectators?" "The trial is about to begin." "Lady Isabella," he nodded in return. "The full-scale attack on Wolfshart City is about to begin, and it is meaningless to interrogate the captives at this time. Moreover, these people are only spies we caught along the way, and they know very little information. If possible, I hope that you and Zero can immediately rush to the front. Rest assured, since we are here, we can't let an important enemy go," Isabella said, spreading out her hands. "As for the trial, I can't stop her. Why don't you act as a spectator? It won't take long anyway." "Same as before." "Yes, the rules are basically the same," she smiled. "Zero likes this kind of game the most." "Then quickly start." Damn it, Maine's face was expressionless, but his heart was extremely annoyed. Rather than calling it a trial game, it would be more appropriate to call it a cat and mouse game. The captives had to escape from the other side's designated range or defeat the witches in order to get a chance to live, but this chance was extremely slim. It was just a bait to lure the mice to fight. It seemed easy to achieve, but in fact, it was far beyond reach. This was also his intention, to drive away the Judgment Army who were responsible for protecting and monitoring the pure witches. This process was completely unfair, and the behavior of the other side was also far from being pure. If they saw too much of it, perhaps their faith in the church would be shaken. When I become the Pope, I must teach them the importance of obeying orders. At this time, Zero had already untied the ropes on the captives, and at the same time spread out her hands, indicating that she did not carry any weapons. And in front of the captives were placed a long sword, a scimitar, and a light crossbow. "Come on, fight or escape, follow your heart," she said with a smile, and her tone was still gentle. "Only God can make a judgment." One of them gritted his teeth, suddenly picked up the crossbow from the ground, and directly shot at the pure witch. Then, regardless of whether the shot hit or not, his other hand had already grabbed a long sword, and took advantage of the momentum to slash forward. The whole movement was so smooth that it was obviously not a skill that a militia would have. However, the sword did not cut anything, and the pure witch took 2 steps back, easily avoiding this surprise attack. When he raised his head, he could not help but be stunned, only to see that the crossbow bolt was bitten by the other side, as if it was a harmless branch. Zero spat out the crossbow bolt, smiled and said, "Please continue." The captive's eyes widened, and his hands slightly trembled. Maine could see that the courage that he had gathered with great difficulty was almost gone. Even if he continued to fight, it was estimated that he would only be able to make one last blow. Sure enough, after a moment of hesitation, he let out a roar as if to vent his anger, raised his sword and rushed straight at the unarmed woman. But this blow was too stiff. Even with his eyes closed, Maine could guess the result. Judging from the short contact with Zero for the past 2 weeks, the ability of this pure witch was simply bottomless. She was not an extraordinary, but she had a fighting talent that was no less than that of an extraordinary witch. This kind of talent did not lie in strength or resistance to blows, but in the superb skills. Even if she did not use her magic, she was also a terrible enough fighter. Zero slightly leaned her body, easily avoiding the opponent's slash, and then with a pair of seemingly weak hands, she clamped the captive's head, and with the help of his forward momentum, gently pulled. Only a light sound was heard, and the captive suddenly became limp as if all the bones in his body had been pulled out. Chapter 312. Seeing this scene, the other captive turned around and fled, which made Zero somewhat disappointed. She turned into a ray of light and entered the captive's body. The captive immediately stopped, his eyes turned white, and then his body underwent a strange change. This was not the first time Maine had seen such a scene, but no matter how many times he saw it, he could not help but feel a chill in his heart. A dim light burst out from the captive's body, and his body twisted and deformed, finally turning into the appearance of a pure witch. He knew that this was not a simple replacement or killing, but what exactly happened during the transformation process, perhaps only the Pope and the person involved would understand. Zero took a deep breath and walked back to the last captive. He was the youngest of the 3 captured spies, about 14 or 15 years old. His slightly immature eyes were full of shock and fear, as if he could not believe what had just happened. "Now, only you are left," she whispered, ire. Hearing these words, the boy who was trembling with fear and wanted to pick up the scimitar was suddenly stunned. Why? God told me everything. You were originally a child of a farmer in the suburbs, but because of the Wolf King's order, the whole village was forced to move into the city to undertake labor such as repairing the city wall, making military supplies, transporting provisions, and so on. They didn't let you off just because you were young, but recruited you into the investigation team. In reality, they left you to your own devices. She reached out and stroked his cheek. The best evidence is that when you first came back with information about the movement of the church's army, the captain of the guards didn't even let you through the city gates. After listening to the report, he let you continue to follow us. Am I right? Ire opened his mouth, but could not say a word. Of course they won't let you in because your family no longer exists. Whether it's your parents or brothers, they're just like you. They're just Wolf King's consumables. If they let you go back, won't everyone in the scouting team know about it? Zero continued, your father accidentally fell and died when he was filling the gap in the city wall, and your mother went to the supervision team but was whipped and punished. She is now in a critical condition. Without God watching over all this, the evil in the world will always flow wantonly like sewage. Are you sure you want to serve such a ruler? He couldn't help but widen his eyes, and an uncontrollable grief appeared on his face. Impossible, you're lying to me. God never lies. The pure witch shook her head. You know deep down that I'm telling the truth. The root cause of all this is that the nobles have never treated you as their own kind. You are just livestock that they can take whatever they want. What we need to do is to put an end to all this evil and injustice and build a new world under the supervision and protection of God. Al fell to his knees and cried bitterly, What should I do? Follow your heart. Only God can judge. He choked with sobs and said, I was wrong. I'm willing to tell you everything I know. I'm willing to do anything to save my mother. Good boy. Zero patted his head and took out a plant full of slender leaf from her pocket and handed it to him. Eat this and have a good sleep. It can help you stabilize your emotions. She tore off half of the leaf and put it in her mouth to chew. Just like me. When Wolfshart City is breached tomorrow, maybe you'll be able to see your mother again. Maine frowned. That plant was the sleeping fern used to make dreamland water. It had no effect on witches when eaten raw, but for ordinary people, it was an extremely strong poison. Winter flowers had to be used to neutralize the toxicity. Sure enough, not long after the captive ate it, his face turned ashen. He clutched his throat and looked at Zero's smiling face in disbelief. His throat emitted a gasping sound. Soon his nails pierced his skin and blood vessels, and his neck was dyed bright red with blood. After struggling in pain for half a quarter of an hour, his body gradually went limp and he stopped breathing. It's a pity that God didn't forgive your sins. Zero curled up the corner of her mouth and walked in front of the archbishop. She bowed and said, My lord, what do you think of this trial? Is it similar to Lady Heather's style? Why did you trick him into eating the sleeping fern? Maine asked in a deep voice, If it was Heather, we would only add one more devout believer, instead of making him realize his mistakes and then executing him. If the captive's relatives were really like what I said, they could naturally be recruited as believers. Unfortunately, I don't know the real situation of his parents. I just spoke nonsense. She shrugged her shoulders. Once he finds out that these are lies, it will obviously be bad for the church. Believe me, I am wholeheartedly working for the church. If you are wholeheartedly working for the church, you should just stay in the tent and wait for orders. Maine impatiently turned his head, the attack is about to begin, you should immediately prepare, according to the plan, the Wolf King and the Queen of Clearwater. They must die, my lord, the pure witch said with a smile. If it was just me, I might not be able to do it, but since even Isabella has come, they will absolutely not be able to escape from the Wolfshart Kingdom. Woo, woo, the horn of the attack rolled across the sky, and in the midst of the dark clouds and the rustling autumn wind, the second siege began. 2 miles away, the siege beasts used to launch their iron spears blossomed with a magical radiance. When this radiance was as bright as the sun, the iron spears seemed as if they were thrown by the hands of a giant. In an instant, a deafening roar broke out, and with a speed that was hard to see with the naked eye, it flew straight towards the city wall. Even after crossing such a long distance, its power did not diminish in the slightest. The snowstone wall was simply unable to stop it. It easily smashed the stones blocking the way into pieces, and even the militia squatting behind the walls suffered a calamity. After only 3 rounds of shooting, the city gate was completely smashed, and the nearby walls were also in ruins. Although the speed of the devil's siege weapons was comparable to that of a catapult, the range was several times longer. Under such an offensive, the garrison was simply unable to fight back. Because they couldn't see the firing trajectory, they didn't even know where the next attack would fall. The church's army had not yet moved, but the outer defensive line was already in danger. Just at this moment, an earth-shattering noise suddenly came from behind the city wall. A huge fireball soared into the sky, and everyone felt the vibration under their feet. Accompanied by flames and black smoke, this section of the stone wall suddenly collapsed, and a gap finally appeared on the mottled wolf's teeth. The urgent horn sounded again, and the mixed team of the army of judges and the God's punishment army began to charge towards the city wall. From a distance, it looked like a flowing sea of gold and red, and anyone who dared to block their way would be mercilessly swallowed up. Now, the garrison of the Wolfshart Kingdom had to use their own flesh and blood to fight against these warriors who didn't belong to the mortal world. To be continued. Chapter 313. Mortals can't defeat demons, Isabella thought. That's why the church had the God's punishment army. They were the best weapon against the demons because they had infinite strength, no pain, and no fear. Although they didn't have the ability to act independently, it was not necessarily a disadvantage when marching in battle. Such a powerful force was naturally not something that the guards, who were mere mortals, could resist. Especially without the support of the city wall, it was simply impossible to defeat these elites of the church in close combat. The Golden Torrent was the army of judges. The main force broke through the main gate of Wolfshart City and fought with the assembled guards. The red dots were the God's punishment army. They jumped over the collapsed walls as if they were walking on flat ground and began to kill the enemies who tried to stand firm. Do you want to help them? She turned to look at Zero. The latter yawned and said, No, my magic power is limited and must be reserved for the important target. You can use swords, hammers, and crossbows to fight. Isabella curled her lips and said, Anyway, they can't defeat you. Zero shook her head and said, If I go, they can easily win. If I don't go, they can also easily win. I don't want to do this kind of meaningless thing. Well, she changed the topic and said, Why did you do that before? What? To play with that captive. His Excellency the Bishop's face is stiff, Isabella said with some worry. He doesn't seem to like this kind of trial. And the next pope is likely to be him, so you may suffer a little. His Excellency Maine will be angry because he hasn't become pope yet, Zero said indifferently. When he enters the library on the top floor of the pivotal secret temple, he will naturally understand that this is the way to please God. What way? To play with. The pure witch stroked her snow-white hair that was blown messily by the wind. God has never come to the world, nor does he protect the world. He only uses an illusory goal to make us approach it one after another, eager to get its gift. This is very similar to the trial just now, isn't it? At least I gave him a clear goal, but God has nothing. He didn't even guarantee that the goal is real, or in other words, everything is our own speculation. Even so, we still risked our lives. TSK, this is the most thorough toying. What is this guy talking about? Why can't I understand a single word? Isabella frowned. You've been to the library? No, she shrugged. His Majesty O'Brien told me all this. He was not a witch and his lifespan was nearing its end. He had heard that when mortals reached the end of their lifespan, they would revisit their life experiences and could not help but want to find someone to talk to. He even wanted me to devour him before I died. You can't, of course I can't, this will make Lord Maine furious, Zero interrupted. Don't worry, I know what I can't do. She smiled mysteriously, there's also another possibility, what if I lose? Wouldn't I be giving my body to him for free? I don't think so. If you lose, nothing will happen. Isabella sighed. This guy was a strange person, probably related to her ability. After devouring so many people, there was almost nothing in the world that she had not experienced. So Zero was rarely enthusiastic about one thing. Everything she did was for fun, and it had to be unusual fun. Isabella turned her eyes back to the battlefield. Suddenly, a group of desperados appeared on top of the city wall. They rushed toward the god's punishment army. Most of them were pierced by the whistling spears when they approached, but there were still a few who managed to get close to the god's punishment army. Then there was an explosion, and the smoke and dust raised covered the gap in the city wall. This should be the alchemy weapon that appeared in the last siege. She thought, it looks powerful, and it is a good choice to use to contain the demonic beasts. However, fighting against the god's punishment army was tantamount to suicide. If it were not for the pills, they would not even be able to get close to Scourge. On the other side, the flow of the Golden Sea also slowed down. Suddenly, a raging fire broke out under the city gate, isolating the judges who had not yet entered the city. After some people touched the fire, even if they rolled on the ground, they still could not put it out. Well, the density of God's stones of retaliation behind the gate has increased several times, and there are also 2 of higher quality. It seems that some important people have come. Isabella said. Since that's the case, let's go. Zero stretched her body. But these 2 people are not the Wolf King or the Queen of Clearwater. She glanced at the inner city. The strongest reaction is still in the castle. Are you sure you want to go? Isn't the army in trouble? An easy victory and a Pyrrhic victory are not the same thing. I have to help His Holiness O'Brien reduce his losses. Zero tilted her head and said seriously, as I said before, I am wholeheartedly for the church. In the afternoon, the siege of Wolfshart City's outer defense line was finally broken. After Scourge took control of the breach, the judges began to clear the streets of the resistance. The target has begun to move. Isabella looked in the direction of the castle. They seemed to intend to go to the river dock. The 2 important people who came to organize the resistance were the Wolf King's sons, and now both of them had been swallowed by Zero. Through the prince's information, she further confirmed that the moving god stone was the biggest target of this mission. In addition, they had also killed a fallen witch, whose appearance and attire looked like that of a person from a different race. After the witch's death, the number of mercenaries who dared to die together with the god's punishment army suddenly decreased. They probably want to leave by ship, Zero said with a smile. Let's go and complete the mission given by His Holiness. The other side's actions were obviously very cautious, changing several routes along the way. After arriving at the dock, they did not board the ship with the black sail, but instead chose a small single-masted merchant ship. However, no matter how they covered their tracks, their every move was exposed to Isabella's surveillance. The moment the Wolf King and the Queen of Clearwater boarded the deck of the small boat, the 2 of them had already surrounded them from both sides of the dock. Most of the 20 people on the ship were personal guards, and at this time, they did not even need to ask to know that the situation was not right. Everyone pulled out their weapons, jumped off the ship, and rushed straight towards the pure witch. Once again, Zero showed her exquisite fighting skills. After snatching the sword of a personal guard with her bare hands, she fought with the crowd. Every time she swung her sword, someone would fall, and her footsteps were light and agile, almost no one could see through her next attack. Whether it was picking, chopping, or blocking, Zero used the most appropriate strength and the most tricky angle to swing her sword. Soon, more than 10 personal guards were lying on the ground, all of them killed by a single sword strike. The Wolf King pulled out the sword from his waist, ready to fight to the death. Isabella, he shouted. I know, the latter immediately launched her ability, which was a circle of no light that could only be seen by the magic eye. In Isabella's field of vision, the black forbidden areas formed by different god stones of retaliation were slightly trembling at their own frequency, like ripples on the surface of the water. She controlled the field to vibrate at the same frequency, and then connected it with the god's stone area. The ripples of the 2 instantly offset each other, and the field became flat and smooth. Zero immediately turned into a dim light and drilled into the Wolf King's body. When the Wolf King twisted and turned into a pure witch, the Queen of Clearwater showed a look of disbelief. Why can you use your ability in front of the God's Stone of Retaliation? Because the God's Stone is not what you think. Isabella then smoothed out the other side's trembling, but you don't need to know this, because it will soon be over. Before her voice fell, Zero once again rushed towards Garcia Wimbledon. To be continued. Chapter 3:14. It had been a long time since she had felt such warm sunshine. Garcia stood in the garden and took a deep breath. The smell of rosemary floated into her nose along with the breeze. This was not the kingdom of eternal winter. In the far north, there was nothing but cold wind, frozen soil, and fragrant winter flowers. In the backyard of the castle, there were always pieces of meat and intestines waiting to be dried, and the strong fishy smell lingered in the air. This was also not the port of Clearwater. The wind did not carry the familiar salty and humid smell, and even if she closed her eyes, she could not hear the sound of the sea rushing up to the beach. This was the palace of Greycastle, she thought. But it was a little different from what she remembered. Garcia sat down beside the central flower pond and stroked the slightly rough stone bricks. When she was a child, she had fallen while playing hide-and-seek here. Her forehead had hit the edge of the flower pond and blood had flowed all over her face. Her father had knocked away all the stone bricks and replaced them with smooth cobblestones. In this way, although she could no longer trip and hurt people, she could no longer use it as a cover to hide. At that time, she remembered that in addition to herself, there were also Gerald and Timothy. When they saw their sister fall, they were all frightened. In order to coax her to stop crying, they even imitated their own fall and deliberately hit their heads against the edge of the flower pond. Of course, after that, they were beaten by her father. It was a part of the past that Garcia had thought she would never recall. It was like a secret buried under a tree, buried deep in the ground. But when she returned to the old place, she found that this scene had not faded in the slightest. Even after digging it out from the soil, it was still vivid. Everything seemed to have returned to her childhood. So this is your world, a strange voice sounded from behind her. As a place of rest, it is a good choice. Garcia turned around and saw a woman in white walking out from behind the flower pond. She had a pair of light red eyes and snow-white long hair. Her facial features were so exquisite that they seemed to have been carefully carved. Her voice was ethereal and pleasant, as if she was an angel who had fallen into the mortal world. The Queen of Clearwater's face was completely gloomy. You are a witch of the church. My name is Zero. The word witch doesn't suit me. She chuckled. I am called a pure witch. I am different from those who have fallen. Pure witch? It's just a plaything raised by the church, Garcia said coldly. What kind of trick is this? Is your ability to create illusions? She suddenly picked up a stone and squeezed it in her hand. It's just an illusion. None of this can fool me. The queen's roar traveled far away, but the scene in front of her did not change. The stone did not shatter in response to her roar. Instead, her skin was cut by the hard edges. Spreading out his hand, he felt a sharp pain from the wound. It was clear and real. I can see that you're not completely ignorant of witch's abilities. This makes things much easier. Zero lifted the corner of her skirt and slightly bowed. Welcome to the world of consciousness, I call it the soul battlefield. We will fight here, and the winner will get everything, and the loser will lose everything, just like the oracle recorded in the holy book. Soul, battlefield. Garcia was startled. Suddenly, she felt a heart-wrenching pain coming from her chest. Zero pulled out a spear from nowhere and pierced it directly into her chest. Her breathing suddenly became difficult. She opened her mouth to shout, but no sound came out. Zero twisted the spear and fiercely pulled it back. Blood spurted out from the tip of the spear and soon, half of her body was soaked. Garcia knelt on the ground and trembled, trying to cover the wound. The massive loss of blood gradually made her consciousness blur. The next moment, she found herself still standing in the same place, her body intact. The shadow was standing a few meters away from her, as if he had never left the place. What happened? Garcia gasped for air. Illusion. She covered her violently heaving chest. The place where she had been pierced was still aching. Lowering her head, she saw a large pool of blood sprayed out from under her feet. This is the basic rule. Your consciousness is not immortal. Zero spread out her hands. The pain of every death is real to you. It will consume your spirit and physical strength. When this feeling is beyond what you can bear, the real sleep will come. Every time you die, your body will return to its original state. An average person can withstand 3 to 4 times at most. Of course, I have also seen many strong-willed people who can endure 7 or 8 times, or even more. She gently explained, although I am looking forward to your performance, I can understand if you give up resistance. After all, continuous death is also an unbearable torment for me. Choosing to escape at this time is not a cowardly act, especially when the end has already been decided. After saying this, she dropped the spear in her hand and once again pulled out a big sword from her back. She jumped straight up and slashed at Garcia. The latter's eyes widened. The pure witch is wearing a white robe, so it is impossible for her to hide such a huge weapon. Those weapons are all made out of thin air. Zero's words suddenly flashed in her mind. So this is your world, I call it the soul battlefield. Your consciousness is not immortal, it is real to you. The big sword slashed down, but it did not split the Queen of Clearwater in two. Instead, it hit a large iron shield. The huge rebound force made it impossible for Zero to hold the sword hilt. The big sword was sent flying, and her body was forced to retreat several steps. Garcia also fell to the ground because of this powerful slash. The end is decided. She clenched her teeth and sneered twice. You said before, this is my world, right? While speaking, she turned over and climbed up. A crossbow suddenly appeared in her hand, and she raised it to shoot at the other side. At the same time, a cross rose behind Zero, firmly trapping her body. The crossbow arrow instantly entered the pure witch's abdomen. She suddenly showed a painful expression, gasped twice, and then slowly opened her mouth. I am surprised, cough cough, if it was an ordinary person, it would be very difficult to accept all of this, let alone mobilize their consciousness to fight back. You are indeed, the Queen of Clearwater who gave Sir Main a headache. Thank you for the compliment, Garcia picked up the spear that fell to the ground. If it weren't for your nonsense, I wouldn't have been able to understand the wonders of the world of consciousness so quickly. Next, how many holes should I poke in your body? She smiled with difficulty. Do as you wish. When Garcia stabbed the pure witch for the 10th time, she finally died. She deliberately avoided the fatal spots, and started from the limbs and abdomen. At first, Zero would let out an unbearable scream of pain, but later on, her voice gradually became lower. Next, this guy should be able to recover, right? However, this was the Palace of Greycastle, her home field. Since she could change the environment and objects at will, it was impossible for her to lose. Sure enough, a white light flashed on the pure witch's body, and in the blink of an eye, the wound disappeared. Zero once again opened her light red eyes. Garcia raised her spear, ready to send her to her death, but a sudden change occurred. She saw the pure witch's hands, which were bound by the cross, easily break free from the rope, kick the handle, and in the blink of an eye, close to her side, raised her hands and swung. Before Garcia could react, she had already lost all feeling in her body. The headless body fell with a loud bang, and the other side's hands were empty. How is this possible? After a few breaths, the Queen of Clearwater covered her neck, and took 2 steps back in bewilderment. Just now, she used her arms to cut off her neck. Looking at the broken hemp rope on the cross and the blood on her hands, it was obvious that the previous scene was not an illusion. If you can't understand the nature of consciousness, how can I face a real battle? Zero smiled, moreover, you seem to be very puzzled. How can I break free from a rope as thick as a finger? In fact, it's not difficult to understand. The winner gets everything, the loser loses everything. Among the people I devoured, there is a type of witch who is exceptionally strong. They have infinite strength, agile skills, and are not afraid of the influence of God's stone of retaliation. You may not know, but the church has a special name for them, extraordinary. She spread her hands. Just using conventional means is not enough to defeat me. If you want to survive, you have to double your efforts. Now, it's my turn. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 3:15. For the first time, Garcia witnessed the horror of an extraordinary. Her weapon was just an ordinary one-handed sword, but every move she made was so oppressive that it could take one's soul away. Every hit on the shield was as heavy as a two-handed sword. After 2 or 3 hits, Garcia could no longer raise her arms, and then her chin was smashed by a slash from the bottom up. After recovering, the Queen of Clearwater completely abandoned her defense. In a flash, a bed crossbow appeared in front of her. She pulled the trigger, but instead of an iron spear, she shot several jars of Styx black water. Zero swung her sword to cut down the jars, but was drenched by the black water. The evil fire crystals soaked in the jars came into contact with the air, and quickly burned, turning the pure witch into a pillar of fire. But the next move didn't work. The opponent used a speed far beyond that of an ordinary person to quickly move around the flower pond, and the bed crossbow simply couldn't turn around. Garcia could only rely on the stone walls and iron railings covered with spikes to stop the pure witch's movement, turning the flower pots placed in the garden into explosives filled with snow powder, and sometimes the ground would suddenly sink, forming a fatal trap. In this way, after killing the opponent several times, Garcia found that her breathing gradually became heavy, beads of sweat slid down her forehead, and the waves of dizziness in her head almost made her unable to stand. Well done, the reborn Zero didn't take advantage of the situation to attack, but instead clapped her hands. You being able to do this is already beyond my expectations, but I forgot to tell you, although in this world you can use your own consciousness to change the environment and place, but it consumes far more energy than creating things out of thin air, even comparable to resurrection. You should be able to feel the weakness and exhaustion of your body. Maybe the next time you die, it will be a complete and eternal sleep. Ha, that's still better than stretching out your neck to be killed, Garcia gasped a few times, and you seem to have forgotten the screams you made when you were burned by the evil fire. How many times did you die this round? 3 times, or 4 times? I don't think you can last longer than me. Zero was silent for a moment before opening her mouth. Since I became a pure, the church has made a lot of preparations for me, from gaining knowledge, learning fighting skills, to feeding the army of judges to improve my ability. The judgment warriors knew that they would be sacrificed, but they still stepped into the soul battlefield. In the realm of consciousness, they tempered my skills by fighting to the death. Then, they accepted death with peace of mind and passed on their understanding and experience to me. Garcia did not interrupt her. Perhaps the other party was stalling for time, but she did need to rest for a while. The continuous pain made her consciousness gradually blurred. The earth began to tremble, cracks appeared in the sky, and under the thunder and lightning, the garden was set ablaze. A strong will can only delay failure, but it can't change the result. Zero closed her eyes. You've persevered long enough. Rest in peace. As soon as her voice fell, the whole world collapsed. It's over. Isabella curled her lips. Shouldn't it be over in an instant? You've obviously changed back to your original appearance, but you didn't say a word for a long time. I thought you really failed. I found some interesting things in her memory. Zero opened her eyes. These ideas make me feel a little emotional. Oh. There's actually something that makes you emotional? Isabella said carelessly. That strange alchemy powder, you should have found it, right? Yes, the alchemists call it strong snow powder. Its composition is quite simple, and it's common in the workshop. That's good. Hurry back to the holy city and report to His Holiness O'Brien. She exhaled. The battle here will continue for at least 3 or 4 days. But without the leader and the witches, the remnants are no longer a threat to the gods' punishment army. Let's go. Zero nodded. Wait. Isabella stopped her. What's wrong? Is it an illusion? Her appearance is obviously the same as before, but why do I always feel that there is something different in her light red eyes? Isabella carefully looked at her for a moment, then shook her head. No. Nothing. Maybe I'm thinking too much. To be continued. Chapter 3:16. In the Lord's Hall of Border Town, a grand celebration banquet was being held. In addition to the witches, all the high-ranking members of the City Hall and the First Army were present, including Berev Mons and Carter Lannis, who were originally nobles, and Iron Axe and Kyle Sichi, who were born as commoners. Especially the latter, it took Roland a lot of persuasion to pull him out of the laboratory to participate in this, in his words, meaningless, banquet. In order to let the people feel the same way, in addition to the public speech, he also ordered the kitchen to bake a large batch of white bread with the refined starch left over from the production of explosives, and distributed it to the people of Border Town. As long as they had an ID card, they could receive a limited amount of delicious food from the City Hall. While the First Army was on their way home, most of the people in the town already knew of the victory of the battle. Of course, they might not understand the purpose and meaning of this expedition, but as long as there was free bread, it was a day worth celebrating. This was also the first time that Roland imitated King City's style of holding an elegant banquet. There was no barbecue or large pieces of stew, all the food was cut into small pieces and served on white plates. There was a variety of seasonings placed on the side, which could be dipped according to their own taste, similar to the buffet restaurants of later generations. Welcome back, he carried 2 glasses of fruit wine towards Anna. You must have worked hard on the road. You've already said the same thing at the dock. Anna took the wine glass, and my answer was still the same, it wasn't hard. The glasses slightly touched, the girl's eyes were filled with a sweet smile. Roland resisted the urge to hug her on the spot, and then raised his glass to the other witches to celebrate. What about me, what about me? Lightning shouted. You also have a share. Roland called the waiter who served the wine, took a glass of cider. You've worked hard. I want to drink white. The little girl raised her head and said. Ah. He thought for a moment, and finally agreed to the other side's request. This little devil was always very curious. If he kept refusing, maybe she would learn from Nightingale and quietly sneak into the kitchen to steal wine to drink. Okay, but only 1 glass. Just as Roland handed her a glass of low-alcohol white wine with ice and grape juice, she suddenly leaned over and kissed him on the cheek. Ahem, is this the fjord's etiquette again? That's right, Lightning nodded vigorously. My father said so. Since it wasn't the first time they had seen this, the witches didn't find it too strange. Instead, Sylvie and the others widened their eyes, and then looked at Roland with accusatory eyes, making the latter turn his head away rather awkwardly. Was there really such an etiquette in the fjords for kissing the leader during a victory party? Next was a toast to his subordinates. When it was the chief alchemist's turn, he leaned over and asked in a low voice, Your Royal Highness, I have read the intermediate chemistry that you gave me twice, but there are still many parts that I don't understand. It talks about the microscopic composition of matter. This part involves a lot of physics knowledge. You'll have to read another book. Roland pointed out, I suggest that you first read the entire elementary physics, and then read the incomplete chemistry book from the beginning, so that many of your doubts can be answered. I also plan to do so, but... He hesitated. Your Royal Highness, why does the cover of each ancient book have a different color? Do they have any special meaning? Well... Roland pondered for a moment. The color represents its level and the difficulty of obtaining it. Is that so? Kyle said thoughtfully, from green to purple, It seems that the darker the color, the more mysterious the knowledge, so the advanced chemistry must be black. No, it's orange. Ah. Kyle was startled. Why? Roland smiled. Who knows? Halfway through the banquet, he walked out of the hall and came to the castle terrace. Under the gentle evening breeze, Roland couldn't help but feel a trace of coolness. Half of autumn had passed, and he realized that it wouldn't be long before the long winter brought by the months of demons would cover the entire western region. However, this year was completely different from the previous year. The trade with the Marjorie Chamber of Commerce had brought a lot of liquidity. In addition to exchanging these golden dragons for food and materials, a considerable part of it was distributed to the people in the form of salaries. According to the statistics of the convenience market, the sales of various goods had increased a lot recently, and some goods that could significantly improve the quality of life, such as steaks and eggs, were growing very rapidly. There was no doubt that this was a sign that the living standards of the people were gradually improving. In particular, the natives had new free housing, and their salaries had increased a lot compared to the past. They began to try to buy food that they could usually only enjoy during festivals. The newly introduced population was still at the stage of saving money to buy a house. When they could settle down, the market would inevitably usher in a new peak of sales. In the end, what did the people need? Sometimes, as long as they had enough to eat and drink, they would be grateful to the Lord and follow him until their death. In this era, most of the civilians were easily satisfied. Your Royal Highness, be careful not to catch a cold. Nightingale appeared behind him, holding a thin leather coat in her hand. She threw the coat to Roland, took out a piece of dried fish, and stood beside him. What are you thinking about here? Nothing, he smiled and put on the coat. I just suddenly wanted to see my territory. The town seems to be very lively. Nightingale pointed in the direction of the brightly lit square. It's already evening, but there are still so many people who haven't gone home. Because today is the first day of the new play, Dawn, Roland smiled. It's also the first time the troupe has returned to the town after a few months. The people probably can't wait to see Miss May and Ms. Irene again. But then again, Miss May would soon become Ms. Maylanis. He really didn't expect that his chief knight would act so quickly and take the star of the western region into his hands. When the other side mentioned it to him with a sincere face, he was stunned for a while before he reacted. The wedding of the chief knight required the approval of the loyal lord, and Roland naturally had no objection to this kind of thing. Finally, the wedding date was set after the end of the months of the demons, which was the day when Border Town was officially built. When I first sneaked into the town, it was still a dead place, Nightingale sighed. Now, even standing in the castle, I can feel their joy. Life is always getting better day by day. Roland raised his head, looked at the bright, cloudless night sky, and took a deep breath. He still had a lot to do, such as expanding the scope of education, establishing public health care, strengthening cultural construction, encouraging childbirth, and so on. These would all be transformed into a solid force in the western region and lay the foundation for the unification of Greycastle. What about us? Nightingale asked with a sly look in her eyes. Of course, Roland patted her head. I promise. Yes, your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 3:17. Seeing that His Royal Highness had left, Lightning pulled Maggie to a corner of the hall. Goo! Her hair was almost touching the ground, and when she moved she looked like a floating ghost. Pushing aside the white hair that covered her cheeks, Maggie's cheeks were bulging, and her mouth was still holding a piece of pork chop that she hadn't swallowed. I found an interesting place, whispered Lightning. It's in the concealing forest, and I plan to explore it tomorrow. Do you want to come with me? Gulp. Maggie swallowed the food in her mouth and nodded again and again. Okay. What do you need to prepare? 3 things for the expedition. No, 3 things that are most commonly used. Lightning found that when she spoke, she would occasionally use some strange words that His Royal Highness Roland often used: a fire sickle, dry food, and a dagger. The distance isn't far, and you only need to bring enough food for a day. Don't fill your pockets like last time. Okay, Goo. Maggie patted her chest and was ready to leave, but Lightning stopped her. Remember, this expedition is our secret, you can't tell anyone else, the little girl said. Tomorrow morning we will set off. Looking at Maggie's back, who couldn't wait to go to the table, she curled her lips and began to think about tomorrow's plan. Although the bomb was a success and didn't disappoint His Royal Highness's expectations, she found that her flying was far less flexible than before, as if something was restricting her movements. As long as she raised her speed, Lightning felt as if there was always a devil chasing her from behind. This was an obstacle brought by fear. She realized that the source was the trip to the stone tower. After seeing the frightening figure at the basement door, she lost her calm and calmness, and only wanted to escape from here as soon as possible. After that, she began to doubt her identity as an explorer. Fear wasn't terrible, what was terrible was the unknown. If she wanted to overcome it, she had to get close to it first. In her heart, Lightning silently recited her father's teachings. Tomorrow she might encounter real danger, but an explorer shouldn't be afraid of danger, let alone retreat. If she couldn't overcome this, she was afraid that it would be difficult for her to fly freely in the future. This was also the reason why Lightning decided to hide it from His Highness Roland and act on her own. According to His Highness's plan, the exploration of the stone tower would be arranged after the months of demons, and at that time, the first army and the witches would be dispatched. She was worried that at that time, even if she visited the stone tower again, it would be difficult for her to have the idea of conquering fear. She would have to rely on the courage of the crowd to approach the dangerous place. It could not be called an adventure at all. His Highness might scold her and confiscate her ice cream, and her sisters in the Witch Union would be worried about her, but she still made up her mind. As the daughter of Thunder, the greatest explorer of the fjords, Lightning could not accept herself as a coward. However, this decision did not mean that she acted recklessly. Compared to a few months ago when she was unprepared, she now had a revolver given by His Highness, a better understanding of the demons, and Maggie by her side. Especially the last point. If they really encountered a group of demons in the tower, even if Maggie couldn't turn into a demonic beast to drive away the enemies, she could at least take her and escape. Explorers don't need a large group of people to boost their courage, she thought, but they can have a few trustworthy teammates. After the banquet, Lightning put the honey meat she had saved up into a cloth bag, followed by weapons, torches, and water bags. The successful completion of the bombing mission had given her some confidence back, and His Highness's encouragement and the slight stubble on her cheeks had doubled her courage. Striking the iron while it was hot, tomorrow was the best time to leave. Early in the morning, she flew to the top of the castle, where Maggie was squatting on top of the wall waiting for her. Check your bag. I've brought everything you told me, Goo. She changed back to her original appearance and opened the backpack that was slung across her waist for the little girl to check. This time the bag was filled with less than half of the food, but at least it was filled with a dagger and a fire scythe. Well, this time you're qualified. Let's go. Lightning soared into the sky and flew towards the direction of the concealing forest with the pigeon. This journey had been repeated many times in Lightning's mind, so even if she closed her eyes she could still find the right direction. Today's weather was slightly gloomy, but it was a lot better than the last time when it was covered with dark clouds. The color blocks that made up the earth slowly moved backwards, and the closer they got to the area of the stone tower, the more nervous Lightning became. You said last night that the interesting place, was it the new eagle's nest? Maggie asked. No, it's much more interesting than that. Lightning shook her head. The goal we're going to explore is an ancient ruin. It's a stone tower that was left behind more than 400 years ago. The basement still hasn't collapsed. Maybe we can find some ancient books that describe the situation at that time. Ancient books? Maggie shook her wings. It doesn't sound as interesting as digging out eagle eggs, Goo. An eagle's nest has at most 2 or 3 eggs, you can eat them up in a few bites, the little girl said patiently. If you can really find such books and bring them back to His Highness Roland, he'll definitely be willing to reward you with a basket of eggs, whether it's boiled or steamed. You can eat 3 eggs a day for a long time. Really? Maggie suddenly became spirited. Then let's hurry to find the ancient books. Goo goo. Near noon, the two successfully arrived above the destination. Half of the stone tower covered with vines and moss still stood in the forest. Everything around it looked the same as a few months ago, nothing had changed. Lightning descended, flew around the stone tower, and after confirming that it was safe, gently landed. Is it here, Goo? The pigeon lay on her head and shouted. Shoo! Lightning made a gesture to keep quiet. In the quiet forest, their voices were particularly noisy. Speak quietly, there may be demons here. Demons? Maggie's tail immediately stood up. You wait for me up there. She pointed to the top of the broken tower and said in a low voice, I'll go and explore the situation first. Stepping on the gradually withering grass, there was a slight rustling sound under her feet. The entrance of the stone tower was not blocked by the plants again, and Lightning could still see a small cluster of vines that she had cut with her dagger last time. She held her breath, went into the tower according to the original route, and approached the basement passage in the center of the tower little by little. Looking at the dark staircase in front of her, she could even hear her heart beating fast. Fear comes from the unknown. Overcome fear, approach the unknown. The little girl kept encouraging herself in her heart, lit a torch, and walked down the stairs step by step. Walking to the corner of the passage, she sneaked a peek. The collapsed wooden door was already broken, and there was no sign of the demon at the entrance of the basement. Only the deep darkness behind the door was left, like a big mouth that was about to devour someone. At this moment, she heard a voice floating over from the darkness. It was faintly discernible, but it was extremely familiar. Lightning could not help but shiver, and all the hair on her body stood up in an instant. She almost could not restrain the urge to turn around and run away. She clenched her teeth, suppressed the surging fear in her heart, covered her mouth, and listened again. This time the voice was much clearer, and the tone was exactly the same as the last time. Help me. To be continued. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 318. Lightning felt goosebumps all over her body. She suddenly remembered the stories that had been circulated among explorers, the demons that crawled out of the abyss, the ghosts that died with resentment, or the undead that lingered. All of them were the nightmares of explorers. Even if they looked into each other's eyes, they could take away a person's life. Illusions and deceptions were their best tricks. Was there such a monster hidden in the ruins? Although Thunder said that these stories were just nonsense made up by some third-rate explorers, she still felt shaken at this moment. Otherwise, who else would be able to shout continuously for months under the siege of the demons without changing the pitch and interval of his shouts? She was now faced with a dilemma. If it was really a legendary evil creature that had killed all the demons, it seemed that she couldn't escape the misfortune of trespassing. But if it really persisted until now, then the demons should still be in the ruins. What should she do? After hesitating for a moment, she decided to fly back to discuss with Maggie. After briefly explaining the situation, Maggie raised her head and said, We can extinguish the torch and sneak in quietly, Coo, so that the demons can't see us. But we can't see them either. I can become an owl. The pigeon rubbed against her face. No matter how dark the night is, it can't stop me, Coo. Lightning's eyes lit up. That's a good idea, but those legendary evil creatures live in the dark all their lives. There must be a way to find their prey, right? Otherwise, they should have starved to death. Didn't you say that they were all made up by others to scare people? Not me, it's my dad, the little girl corrected. It's all the same. Anyway, I've never heard of immortal monsters in Greycastle, Coo. If they are really so terrible, they shouldn't just stay in a small place like the fjords, right? Maggie's body emitted a light, and the pigeon suddenly swelled up and turned into a gray-brown owl, eyes full of eagerness. I thought you would be very interested in these legends. That's right, a qualified explorer would never let go of a chance to verify a legend. Moreover, she still had a mental barrier to overcome. If she fled now, all her previous efforts would be in vain. Lightning hesitated for a moment and decided to do as Maggie said. But, wait a minute. I came here because I had to overcome my fear, so why is he so interested in exploring the ruins? Could it be? You're so impatient. Don't tell me it's because of the basket of eggs. The owl blinked its big round eyes and turned its head away. Once again standing at the entrance of the basement, Lightning took a few deep breaths, held the revolver tightly in her hand, and quietly walked into the deep darkness. Perhaps because Maggie was squatting on her shoulder, she felt much calmer than before. The demon that was pecked twice by the owl suddenly collapsed like a weather-beaten broken stone, turning into a pile of flying ash in the blink of an eye. What's going on? Lightning landed beside Maggie and looked at the other three demons in surprise. Under the illumination of the yellow light, their bodies were densely covered with fine cracks, and there were traces of spider webs between their legs. Through their ferocious skulls, one could see that their eyeballs and skin were grayish-white, and there was not a trace of life in them at all. So that's why, she thought, the owl's vision is several times better than mine in dim light, so that's why Maggie said those words. But before she could relax, Lightning's eyes were completely attracted by something else. In the middle of the platform surrounded by demons, stood a huge cube. From a distance, it looked like a stone pillar, but when she looked closely, she found that it was actually transparent. Wrapped in the cubic crystal was a woman in a gorgeous robe. Her eyes were closed, her hands were open, and her long blue hair was spread out behind her, as if it was still floating in the wind. Is this a witch? Coo! Maggie flew above the crystal and pecked fiercely. This time, it didn't shatter, instead, it made a crisp knocking sound. So hard, coo! I don't know, murmured Lightning. She put her hand on the crystal and felt a cold chill through her skin. The surface of the crystal was covered with a thick layer of dust. Obviously, the woman had been in this sarcophagus for a long time. Her expression was lifelike, and her tightly knitted eyebrows were raised. She looked a little flustered, but more anxious and worried. Save me, the voice came from behind the crystal again. To be continued, your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 319. Roland moved the quill pen and quickly wrote a paragraph of text on the paper. Before coming here, he had been drawing mechanical drawings on the computer all day, so he thought he would rarely have the opportunity to write with a pen. He did not expect to use this ancient way of writing again. There were 2 documents next to him, both of which were the plans he planned to implement. One was the large-scale production of sulfuric acid. The new equipment had already been manufactured by Anna and Soroya. The lead reactor had been replaced with a more solid and reliable iron shell with an anti-corrosive coating. It was 3 times larger than the previous experimental version. Considering that at the present stage there was no way to collect or purify the production waste gas, mainly from sulfur combustion and nitrogen oxide leakage, Roland set it up at the southern end of the industrial park, far away from the Redwater River and the residential area. He also planned to build a factory around the reactor, erect a chimney, and raise the height of the exhaust gas emission. Since increasing the production of sulfuric acid was of great help to expand the production scale of concentrated nitric acid, putting the equipment into production was the most important task at present. The content of the document was to order Kyle Sichi to select a group of disciples to be specialized in the production of sulfuric acid. Berev also needed to recruit some reliable local residents to act as assistant handymen. The entire chemical plant would have around 100 people in the first phase. The second document was to establish a public medical system. To be honest, Roland was not familiar with this field, and he knew nothing about modern medicine. However, this did not prevent him from developing a simple plan that met the current needs with his common sense. First of all, the biggest role of this department was to publicize and popularize science. For example, water should be boiled before drinking, meat should be cooked before eating, the cause of illness and the way to deal with it, the difference between parasites and microorganisms, and so on. Thanks to his growing prestige, it was not difficult to make the people do something according to his requirements. However, if he wanted them to understand why they had to do it, he needed someone to specially carry out publicity and education. This kind of thing was useless to say once, so he would repeat it 7 or 8 times, or even dozens of times. It was like a slogan hanging in the field. The more he said it, the more people would slowly accept this point of view. Secondly, it was to encourage childbirth. City Hall had limited manpower, and he was not willing to set up a separate family planning department, so he temporarily included this in the public medical system. Population was always the most scarce resource in this era. It was naturally best for the people to have more children. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who liked to pick mushrooms while counting. Wait. The shadow grew bigger and bigger. Unexpectedly, it didn't fly over the castle, but instead descended and rushed straight to the office's French window. Roland was startled and reached out to open the window. Lightning rushed into the room without hesitation. Your Highness. As soon as she landed, she shouted excitedly, I found a witch. A witch? Roland asked curiously, where? In the stone tower of the concealing forest. Lightning pointed to Maggie, who had just flown into the office. She can testify. Coo. Maggie raised her head. Stone tower? He frowned. What happened? Tell me in detail. After listening to Lightning's description, Roland couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. This girl was too bold. She actually dared to explore the ancient ruins of the Devil with a pigeon. But what was more frightening was that there was actually a witch sealed in the ruins. Of course, it could also be an ordinary person sealed by a witch. In any case, this was incredible news. What's with the cry for help? It's this thing. I found it on the table behind her. Lightning took out a palm-sized iron box from her pocket. At first glance, it looked like a small makeup mirror. Opening the lid, he saw a red gem embedded inside. She pulled the trigger next to the gem, and an anxious female voice suddenly appeared in everyone's ears. Help me, Roland immediately shuddered. The voice seemed to be far and near at the same time, and it was really a bit creepy. If he had heard such a cry for help coming from the dark basement, he would definitely turn around and leave without saying a word. There's magic in the gem. Nightingale appeared and said in amazement, I can see a weak magic vortex, just like the one inside a witch's body. Well, it seemed that it was a magic player that could continue to make sound. The possibility that the other party was a witch had increased by 1. Are there other stones like this in the basement of the stone tower? I didn't look carefully. Many parts of the room were flooded. Lightning shook her head. At that time, I just wanted to come back early to tell you the news. Don't do this again, especially if you go to a dangerous place without permission. Roland patted her head, then looked at Nightingale. Call all members of the Witch Union and Iron Axe to the office. The plan to search for the ruins may have to be carried out in advance. Yes, your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 320. Genius 1 second. Remember, if you want to go. Shaw.net provides you with wonderful novels to read. After everyone had arrived, Roland told them everything that Lightning had found. A transparent crystal coffin in an ancient ruin, no signs of decay in the damp basement, a magic gem that kept crying for help, and a demon that turned into ashes. What do you think? Are you trying to say that she might be a witch? Anna pondered. If she's still alive, she might be able to learn more about what happened 400 years ago. It's also possible that she isn't a witch, or even doesn't belong to that era. Scroll hesitated for a moment, and she might not be on our side, Leaf added. This sentence made Roland slightly stunned. Indeed, If the ruins were left behind by the church, the person was likely to be a member of the church. Judging from the luxurious clothing described by Lightning, he might even be a high-ranking member. It would be fine if it was an ordinary person, but if it was a witch, it would be tricky to deal with it. From the fight between Ashes and Nightingale to the attack of the Faceless One, it could be seen that there was no clear dividing line between the fighting power of the witches. Without wearing a god's stone of retaliation, an extraordinary might not be able to compete with an ordinary witch with a unique ability. And if a combat witch was attacked by an auxiliary witch, the situation would be equally worrying. No one could guarantee that her ability would not pose a threat to the witch union in case she was malicious, unless she was awakened within the range of the god's stone of retaliation. Are you all crazy? Are you even considering whether she is on our side? Lily held her forehead weakly. How could a person from 400 years ago live to this day? Witches have always had a short lifespan. Even extraordinaires who have strengthened their bodies can't live for more than 100 years. You're thinking too much. If you ask me, maybe when that thing breaks, the person inside will turn into dust like the devil. Short life is because of the so-called demonic bite, Roland corrected. Witches generally have stronger physical qualities than the average person, so their actual lifespan should be longer. Most people only live for 40 to 50 years, Lily snorted. Do you think everyone lives as long as a tortoise? The average lifespan of 40 to 50 years was due to the poor food supply and poor medical standards. As long as the quality of life improved, it could increase for another 20 years. However, what she said was not without reason, Roland thought. Even with these, there was still a long way to go before reaching 400 years of life. Even a tortoise might not be able to live that long. But she does seem to be alive, cried Lightning. You'll know when you see her. She's completely different from those dead devils. Her skin is smooth and her lips are full of blood. Maggie. Goo. Lightning is right. All right, stop arguing, Vendi interrupted. Whether she's dead or alive, it's worth a try. Are you sure? Scroll asked with a frown. In case she really is a witch of the church, we just need to hang a god's stone of retaliation on her before she wakes up. Moreover, we still have Anna and Nightingale, so it won't be a problem to control her. Vendi calmly said, the key is that she may know about the accident that happened more than 400 years ago. This alone is worth our rescue. Indeed, the information about the devils was very important to Border Town. Moreover, the information that the church tried to hide would certainly be extremely disadvantageous to them. If they could grasp this information in advance, they might be able to take the initiative in future confrontations. Anna and Nightingale also expressed their agreement with Vendi's view. In this way, even if Scroll felt it was inappropriate, she no longer opposed it. The Witch Union had basically reached a consensus. What about the First Army? Roland looked at Iron Axe. We can only dispatch 50 people at most, Iron Axe said. Your Highness, you've already sent several squads to help City Hall recruit refugees from all over the country. Now there are only 500 soldiers left in Border Town. Although Timothy has been punished by God, he may still stake everything and launch a large-scale attack on the Western Territory. The First Army must leave behind enough people to guard against King's City. I understand, Roland nodded. The scale of 50 people was really a little small. If they were to face a long-range spear attack from the devils outside their field of vision, they would likely suffer heavy losses. In order to make up for this, in addition to Lightning and Maggie's aerial reconnaissance, Sylvie's clairvoyance ability was also indispensable. The ideal team should be a hot air balloon and the ground troops advancing in tandem. The witches would be responsible for the vigilance and close combat tasks, and the long-range suppression would be handed over to the Flintlock team. But in this way, the witches of Sleeping Island would also know about the existence of sleepers in the ruins. After considering it over and over again, Roland decided to take Sylvie with him. After all, in this rescue mission, ensuring their own safety was still the most important thing. Just as he was about to arrange the rescue plan, Mystery Moon exclaimed in a low voice, "My God, what is that?" Everyone followed her gaze and looked out the window, and couldn't help but be stunned. Roland couldn't believe it and opened the window, only to see the gloomy sky filled with white fairies. They covered the sky and covered the earth, but they didn't make any sound. He stretched out his hand and caught a small handful of white dots. His palm felt cold. It was snowing. This wasn't normal. As far as he knew, the Western Territory only had one snowfall in winter, not to mention that it wasn't even winter yet. Would it also snow in the last month of autumn? He looked at Iron Axe, who looked serious and slowly said, "I've only been in Border Town for 7 or 8 years, and I've never experienced such a situation. Once it snowed, it meant the arrival of the months of the demons, and the sun would be buried under the dark clouds until the next time it shone. And during this time, the entire Western Territory would face the threat of demonic beasts. Not to mention dispatching the First Army, even transporting the witches by hot air balloon would become dangerous. At this time, the concealing forest was full of ferocious demonic beasts, and leaving the protection of the city walls was definitely an extremely risky thing to do. He had to suspend the rescue plan and wait for the sky to clear up. From the bottom of his heart, he felt that this snow was likely to be an accident, and that it would soon end. After all, the temperature was still at the level of autumn, and hadn't dropped much. 3 days later, Border Town was wrapped in silver, and the distant mountains and forests were covered with a layer of white gauze. In the future, this would definitely be considered a rare beauty, but Roland wasn't in the mood to enjoy the scenery. Although the snow had weakened a lot, there were still some scattered snowflakes falling. The First Army had also entered a state of full alert. The newly built city walls were regularly patrolled every day, and a temporary camp was set up at the foot of the city walls, so that the soldiers could quickly enter the battle. The temperature changed almost every day, and his clothes changed from unlined clothes to a cotton wool coat. On the 4th day, the news from the front made Roland's heart completely sink. The western section of the city walls had been attacked by demonic beasts. The months of the demons had arrived more than a month ahead of schedule. To be continued. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 321. Genius 1 second. Remember if you want to go. The web, providing you with wonderful novels to read. Fjords, Sleeping Island. I didn't expect that the first guest of Sleeping Spell would be you. Tilly smiled and handed him a cup of hot fish soup. Thanks to your help in exploring the ruins of the Shadow Islands. You're welcome. Thunder took the fish soup. Regarding that mysterious sea, even if I don't pay the commission, I'm willing to go there several times. To be honest, if there are no witches to accompany me, the east of the Shadow Islands is definitely a dangerous forbidden area for explorers. He took a sip of the fish soup and couldn't help but let out a breath of hot air. Ah, blacktail fish soup is really delicious. Neither black tea nor black tea ale was popular in the fjords. They were used to having a bowl of cold fish jelly in midsummer and a cup of boiled fish soup when the weather turned cold. Different kinds of fish cooked had very different tastes. This was a custom that Tilly gradually understood after coming to Sleeping Island. That's why you couldn't wait to visit the Sleeping Spell. To be exact, I can't wait to start the next adventure, Thunder said with a forthright smile. The last time I saw the scene in the ruins observation mirror, I was stunned. What was on that land? Why did the stone door appear on the cliff? I couldn't wait to fly over and see. Really? Tilly also poured herself a cup of fish soup. You should know that I intend to go to Border Town in person. I want to have a good talk with the Lord of the Witch Cooperation Association, and I also want to see the months of demons in the western region. Don't you want to go with us? He was silent for a moment, then grinned and said, no, she should have a good life there. This is also good. After all, with this kind of adventure, accidents may happen one day. I lost her mother, I don't want to lose her again. When the time comes, I ask you. I will, Tilly nodded. After all, she is also one of us. She stopped here and smiled. But business is business, although you have helped us a lot, the price for hiring witches still has to be according to the table. Of course, business is business. This is the tradition of the fjords. Thunder drank the fish soup in one gulp and laughed out loud. Seeing that Thunder had left the palace, Ashes walked in from outside the hall and sat down cross-legged beside Tilly. So, who did he hire? Magic servant, Molly, any door, orbit, and doll, Shadow. Tilly unfolded the contract. The fee is finally set at 4,800 golden dragon stones. Very generous, right? 4,000. Ashes's jaw dropped. Where did he get so much money? Don't forget, Thunder is the most famous explorer in the fjords, the fifth princess said with a smile. Whether it's the discovery of new routes or the discovery of treasures from various places, they can all bring him a lot of wealth. Because what I said is right, Tilly curled her lips. Let's change the topic. Maggie still hasn't returned to Sleeping Island. Did something happen there? Maybe she was delayed, Ashes thought for a moment. Or, what? She doesn't want to come back, she shrugged. Compared to the fjords, the living conditions there are much better. I already said not to send witches there, what if Lotus and Honey also don't want to come back? Then let's go, Tilly said. Oh, then I'll go prepare. What? Ashes was stunned for a moment before she came back to her senses. We go there. Princess Tilly curled her lips. Didn't we agree to help him fight against the demonic beasts and bring back the other witches? Without Lotus, next year the immigrants in Crescent Moon Bay won't have a house to live in. But there is still more than a month before winter, so there's no need to go there so soon, right? Chapter 322. Early in the morning, Roland was awakened by the cold. He climbed out of the cold quilt, put on a wool coat, and immersed his feet in a warm bucket of water. This was a corrupt privilege he could only enjoy as a prince. Every morning, the maid would put hot water beside his bed, in addition to a clean towel and hot milk, so that his body could instantly recover its warmth. Of course, compared to the common practice of big nobles, he felt that he was already restrained enough. Originally, Prince Roland had brought the head maid Tyre with this idea, but unfortunately, he didn't get to enjoy it and died. Roland didn't like this practice, so he gave the vacant position to the old maid who was experienced in handling affairs. In fact, this choice was very correct. At present, there were many witches living in the castle, but she still managed to keep the castle in good order inside and outside. The fire in the fireplace had long been extinguished, leaving only white flying ashes. Behind him, a cold wind blew through the gap in the window. It was so cold that it was hard to believe that it was still mid-autumn. Roland dried his feet and washed himself with another basin of hot water. Then he walked to the window and closed it, which had been open all night. Although open fireplaces were very common in this era, he was still worried about the problem of carbon monoxide poisoning, so every night when he slept, he would leave a gap. In the first half of the night, the temperature inside could still be maintained in a warm state, but as the firewood burned out, in the early hours of the morning, it was no different from outside. I have to find a way to solve this problem, Roland thought, otherwise, I won't be able to sleep in the future. After breakfast, he took Nightingale, the chief knight, and a group of guards to the city wall area for a routine inspection. There was a large grassland between the old and new walls, but now it had become a vast expanse of white. Walking on the thick snow, the soles of his shoes made crunching sounds. Looking up, the sky was pale gray, and occasionally a snowflake would float into his neck, bringing a trace of coldness. He knew that this weather was likely to last until next spring, or even longer. How is the situation of the defense line? It's much better than the last time. Carter Lannis looked relaxed. Most of the soldiers of the First Army have been to the battlefield, and they also have revolving rifles. A section of the city wall that is about 100 meters long only needs 10 people to guard it, and it's enough to suppress the demonic beasts circling below. Moreover, the new city wall was half a meter taller than the previous stone wall. It would be difficult for the wolves to leap onto the top of the city wall. It was completely a target practice for the soldiers. As long as there are no hybrid demonic beasts, these monsters won't be able to cross the line of defense. That's good. If the offender is a noble, after handing over a few golden dragon coins, he can be exempted from any punishment. But if a commoner attacks a noble, the crime can be big or small, ranging from cutting off his hand to whipping. But Koya was no longer a nobleman, said the prince, shrugging his shoulders. I stripped him of his title. Yes, your highness. In this way, the punishment will be based on the mood of the lord. No fixed number. Bhairav shook his head. He frowned. Everything depended on his mood. The implication was that it didn't matter how the commoners were manipulated. In the eyes of the nobles, they weren't people that needed to be treated seriously. Other than chopping off their hands, breaking their legs, whipping them, and pulling out their nails, are there any more ordinary punishments? For example, imprisonment. Imprison? Bhairav was taken aback. You mean simply locked up? What kind of punishment is that? The prison is only a place to temporarily detain prisoners, and sooner or later they will be dragged out for trial. If you keep them locked up, you will also have to provide them with food. I'm afraid that in the eyes of some people, this is already a reward. Well, it seems that the imprisonment that was commonly used in later generations wouldn't be useful here. After thinking for a moment, Roland decided to follow the rules of Greycastle. He stood up and swept his eyes across the hall. I will now pronounce the sentence. Koya Jarvis, for dereliction of duty and extortion of fugitives, will be stripped of all his duties in the city hall and sent to work in the mines for 10 years. In addition, he will be fined 3 times the amount of the extorted income. Vader, for taking the initiative to attack the city hall personnel, will be sentenced to 10 lashes. The rest of the fugitives and serfs who participated in the fight will be fined 2 silver royals or 5 lashes. The oatmeal will continue to be distributed free of charge, and all the money that was previously extorted will be returned. He looked at the city hall director. The above sentence will be implemented by you, and the results will be announced to the people of the temporary residential area. As you command, your highness. Bhairav bowed. Returning to his office, Roland leaned back in his chair and stretched. Then he felt a pair of hands on his shoulders, gently massaging them. He closed his eyes and enjoyed this moment of leisure. This incident made Roland realize that with the increasing number of subjects and the rapid expansion of the city hall's authority, the issue of internal supervision might have reached a point where he had to face it. But he didn't want to set up an organization similar to the prosecutor's office, and he was even more unwilling to have the public security, procuratorial, and judicial independence in this era. The former not only required a large number of literate people, but it was also easy for it to become a political body that attacked each other and shirked responsibility, hindering the implementation and development of policies. The latter would also weaken the power of the Lord. It was better to have the power to enact, interpret, and judge laws in his own hands. He needed a simple and effective system that didn't need too many people to play the role of a supervisory organization. Roland grasped the hand on his shoulder. Nightingale dispelled the fog, took the prince's hand and sat back on the table, tilted her head and asked, "What's wrong?" Her slender legs dangled over the edge of the table, the high moccasins and close-fitting leather pants on her feet formed a perfect curve. Roland coughed twice. I intend to set up a new department to supervise the city hall, as well as to arrest other individuals or groups that may endanger the stability of the Western Territory. This department only needs to report to me, completely independent of the city hall and the First Army, he said word by word. I will temporarily name it the Security Bureau of the Western Territory, and I want you to be the person in charge. Me? She blinked her eyes. That's right, only you can easily distinguish between truth and falsehood, Any deceptive tricks are meaningless in front of you. Roland nodded. How about it? If you want, I can provide you with afternoon tea with ice cream in winter, Anne. Nightingale gently pinched his hand. Even if you don't say these things, I will promise you, as long as it's something you want to do. Roland suddenly felt a little embarrassed. She smiled and did not let the silence continue. But what should I do? Well, the supervision part is very simple. The prince adjusted his mood. I will set up an inspection box at the gate of the castle district. You only need to check the report letters in it. In order to solve this problem in the least costly way, it was undoubtedly to mobilize the masses to supervise, and let the city hall itself supervise itself, just like the last year during the months of demons to catch the spies in Border Town. In the future, this method was not easy to use. Whether it was the target of the report or the reporter themselves, they needed to spend a lot of energy to verify, and at the same time there were false reports, not to mention deliberate framing. But these shortcomings did not exist in the face of Nightingale's ability. Verification of information became easy. She only needed to ask face-to-face. Accurate reports would be rewarded, false accusations, false reports would be punished. Implementation around these 2 points, the reporting system would inevitably be extremely efficient. As for maintaining the stability of the Western Territory, eliminating threats and hidden dangers, it is more like an internal intelligence system. I will slowly expand the manpower for you, until your vision can expand to the entire Western Territory. To be continued. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.